Section 1. The Town That Time Forgot. There is a town in America that does not exist on any map. You cannot find it on a highway sign. You cannot type its zip code into a search engine and get a consistent answer. You cannot fly there, drive there, or trace its roads on a satellite image. And yet, more people know its name than know the name of the town they actually grew up in. More people have watched its streets, walked through its shops, and sat inside its homes than have visited most real cities in the world. The town is Springfield. And the first thing you need to understand about Springfield before we go any deeper, before we pull at any of the threads that are going to unravel this whole beautiful, strange tapestry tonight, is this. Springfield is not a setting. It is not a backdrop. It is not the neutral location where a family happens to live while the jokes happen around them. Springfield is the story. It always has been. And the mysteries buried inside it, the patterns and the contradictions, and the questions the show has been quietly asking since December of 1989, those mysteries are more interesting, more unsettling, and more emotionally resonant than anything that happens in any single episode. We are going to spend tonight inside Springfield. We are going to move slowly through it, room by room, theory by theory, mystery by mystery, the way you might walk through a house you grew up in after many years away, noticing things you never noticed before, finding rooms you forgot existed, opening doors that were always closed when you were a child, and finally looking at what was behind them. There will be no rush tonight. This is not a list of fun facts. This is not a countdown of Easter eggs. This is a story about a place that has been telling you the same secret for 36 years in 36 different ways, and we are finally going to sit still long enough to hear it. So, settle in. Let your shoulders drop. Let the light get low and soft. And let me take you to Springfield. The Simpsons first aired on December 17th, 1989. It was a Sunday night. The show was a spin-off of short animated segments that had been appearing on a sketch comedy program, and almost nobody expected it to survive its first season. The animation was loose and a little strange. The characters were yellow, which nobody had ever done before for a primetime animated family. The father was lazy and loud and barely competent. The mother was patient to a degree that seemed almost disconnected from reality. The son was a 10-year-old who had already decided that authority was his enemy. The daughter was an 8-year-old who had already decided that the world deserved better than what it was offering. And the baby was a baby, silent and watching, sucking on her pacifier with enormous eyes that seemed to take in everything. Nobody expected this family to still be sitting on that same orange couch in 2025. And yet here we are, 36 seasons, 788 episodes, the longest-running American animated series, the longest-running sitcom, the longest-running scripted primetime television show in the entire history of the medium. No other family on television has survived this long. No other fictional world has remained in continuous production for a period of time this extraordinary. And in all that time, across every single one of those episodes, across every season and every holiday special and every clip show and every treehouse of horror, nobody in Springfield has aged a single day. Sit with that for a moment. Bart Simpson was 10 years old when Ronald Reagan was still in the final year of his presidency. He is 10 years old right now, tonight, as you listen to this, as you let your eyes grow heavy and your breathing slow. He has been 10 years old through the fall of the Soviet Union and the rise of the internet and the September morning that changed everything, and the decade of smartphones and the pandemic and everything that came after. He has been 10 years old through every single one of those events, and he will be 10 years old next year and the year after that and the year after that. Lisa has been 8. Maggie has been 1. Homer and Marge have been somewhere in their mid-30s, give or take however many birthdays the show has either celebrated or quietly forgotten about. The town around them has changed. The technology in their pockets has changed. The cultural references have shifted and updated and modernized, but the family remains locked, preserved, sealed inside a permanent version of a single moment that keeps refreshing itself without ever moving forward. The industry has a name for this. They call it a floating timeline. The present of the show is always the viewer's present. When you watch an episode that aired in 1993, the characters are living in 1993. When you watch an episode that aired last month, they are living right now. The year slides forward, the world around them updates, but the characters themselves remain frozen at their original ages. It is a standard storytelling device used by many long-running shows, a practical solution to the problem of having characters age out of their roles over decades of production. And on most shows, that explanation is completely sufficient. But The Simpsons is not most shows. Most shows do not run for 36 years. Most shows do not accumulate enough time and enough episodes and enough contradictions to make the floating timeline start to crack. When a show runs for 3 or 4 years and uses a floating timeline, the inconsistencies are small and forgivable. A character references being in high school in the 90s, and later the same character references being in high school in the 2000s. And you barely notice because not enough time has passed for the gap to feel enormous. But when a show runs for 36 years, the floating timeline starts to devour itself. Homer and Marge's backstory has been rewritten at least 4 times. When the show began, their courtship was set in the late 1970s and early 1980s. There were disco songs and bell-bottoms and the particular cultural atmosphere of that era. It made sense. If they were in their mid-30s in 1989, they would have been teenagers in the mid-70s. The timeline held. But as the show continued, as the floating present kept drifting forward, the backstory had to drift with it. By the time you reach the later seasons, Homer and Marge's high school years have been reset to the 1990s, then the early 2000s. Each retelling places their origin story in a different decade, set to different music, surrounded by different cultural artifacts, as if the show's memory of its own history is being constantly overwritten by the needs of the present. Their past is not a fixed thing. It is a living document that gets revised whenever the current episode requires it. And this is where the first thread begins to pull. A family whose history keeps changing is a family without a stable foundation. A town whose residents never age is a town that has been excused from the normal passage of time. A show that has been running for 36 years without a single character aging is a show that is telling you quietly, persistently, with enormous patience, that something is preventing the normal flow of time from working the way it should. The explanations for why this might be are the subject of tonight's journey. Some of those explanations are grounded in the show's own canon, in things the writers put on screen that most viewers noticed as jokes and then forgot. Some of those explanations were developed by fans who watched the same episodes dozens of times and began to see patterns that the casual viewer would never catch. Some of those explanations are so elegantly constructed, so internally consistent, and so well supported by canonical evidence that the show's own creators have been forced to respond to them on the record. And some of those explanations, the ones we are going to arrive at together by the end of tonight, are not really about The Simpsons at all. They are about us. About why we keep watching, about what we need this family to be, about what we lose if Springfield is ever allowed to change. But we are getting ahead of ourselves. We are going to start at the beginning, or close to it. We are going to start in Springfield itself, standing at the edge of town, looking at the thing that dominates the skyline. The twin cooling towers with the crack running up the side. The facility that employs a quarter of the town. The structure that hums and glows at the edge of every establishing shot like a piece of background noise so constant and so familiar that you stop registering it. The Springfield nuclear power plant. Before we go there, before we step inside those cracked walls and start pulling at the threads of what they might have already done to the people living downwind, I want you to notice something about the way we experience Springfield. When you watch the show, when you let it wash over you the way something familiar and beloved washes over you, you are in the same position as the residents of the town. You are inside the loop. You are surrounded by the details, the three-eyed fish, and the yellow skin, and the 4 fingers, and the fact that nobody ages, and because you have seen them so many times, because they have been part of the visual language of the show since the very beginning, they do not register as strange anymore. They register as normal. And that is the most important thing to understand about Springfield before we go any further. The town has normalized its own impossibilities. The residents have normalized them. And quietly, gradually, over 36 years of weekly exposure, so have we. The yellow skin is just the art style. The 4 fingers are just a cartoon convention. The aging freeze is just how animated shows work. The fish with 3 eyes is just a running gag. We say these things because they are the easiest things to say. They are the explanations that require the least investigation, the least discomfort, the least willingness to sit with a question that does not have a clean and comfortable answer. They are, in other words, the Springfield way of looking at things. The collective agreement to see only what we have agreed to see and to call anything that challenges that agreement a joke not worth taking seriously. Tonight we are not doing that. Tonight we are going to look at Springfield the way someone would look at it if they arrived there for the very first time, with no prior exposure to the show, no accumulated comfort with its visual language, no protective layer of familiarity to soften the strangeness. And what we are going to see when we look at it that way is genuinely strange. Let us begin. Springfield was incorporated sometime in the 19th century by a man named Jebediah Springfield, whose real name, it turns out, was Hans Sprungfeld, a murderous pirate who attempted to kill George Washington. The founding myth of the town is built on a lie, which is either a quirky bit of Springfield history or a statement about the nature of American mythology, depending on how generously you want to read the show. The town has a church and a bar directly across the street from each other, which its residents experience as a reflection of the balance between temptation and redemption, or possibly just as convenient geography. It has a nuclear power plant at its edge, built and operated by the wealthiest man in town, a man who appears to have been alive since approximately the time of the Spanish-American War. It has an elementary school with perpetually gutted funding, a police department of breathtaking incompetence, a mayor whose corruption is as consistent as the sun rising, and a population of roughly 10,000 people who have collectively experienced more catastrophes per square mile than any other town in American fictional history. The town has been destroyed by a comet. It has been sealed under a federal dome. It has been invaded, inundated, and rebuilt from scratch more times than most cities that have actually existed in history. It has experienced economic collapse, alien visitation, multiple nuclear near misses, and the literal blocking of its sunlight by a mechanical disk built by its own richest resident. And every Monday morning, without fail, Springfield wakes up exactly as it was. The grass is still green. The nuclear plant is still running. Homer is still late for work. Bart is still 10. The reset is so complete, so thorough, so cosmically reliable that it functions as a kind of gravitational force. No matter what happens, no matter what falls apart, or explodes or gets revealed as a fundamental lie that the entire community has been living inside of. Springfield returns to baseline by the next episode as if nothing happened. Most people call this episodic storytelling. Most people accept it without discomfort because it is standard, familiar, and broadly true of how long-running episodic television works. But there are people who have watched Springfield long enough and closely enough to notice that the resets are not random. They are not arbitrary. There is a pattern to what gets forgotten and what gets remembered, to what consequences stick and which ones dissolve, to which truths are allowed to remain true and which ones are quietly reclassified as jokes. Those people have developed theories, and those theories are going to carry us through the rest of tonight. Each major theory we are going to explore gives a different answer to the same question. Why is Springfield the way it is? Why do people not age? Why does nothing permanently change? Why is the town structured the way it is, with a dangerous facility at its center and an impossibly old billionaire at the top, and a population that seems perpetually unable to notice what is happening to them? The radiation theory says it is because the nuclear plant has fundamentally altered the biology and the cognitive function of everyone living in Springfield, and that the strange physical characteristics and the inability to remember catastrophes and the frozen aging are all symptoms of chronic environmental contamination. The coma theory says it is because the town does not exist at all outside the mind of a man who has been unconscious since April of 1993, and that every episode since that date is a dream being generated by a brain that is slowly dimming, preserving the world it loves in the only way it knows how. The institutional corruption theory says it is because the machinery of power in Springfield, built and maintained by Mr. Burns over more than a century of careful investment, is specifically designed to keep the population compliant, incurious, and incapable of resisting. and that the resets are not failures of memory, but policy decisions made by people who understand exactly what they are doing. The collective denial theory says it is because Springfield, like many small towns and many large nations, has made a social contract with itself to sustain comfortable lies rather than face uncomfortable truths, and that the show has been documenting this contract in episode after episode for 3.5 decades without most viewers ever quite registering what they are watching. And the meta theory, the one that sits above all the others and contains them all, says that all of these explanations are simultaneously true, and that they point towards something larger than any single answer, something about what America needs from its most beloved fictional family, about what we refuse to let them become, about the loop we have built around them and continue to maintain every time we press play. We are going to walk through all of it tonight, slowly, gently, with time to breathe and time to sit with the strangeness before we move on. The cooling towers are waiting. Let's go see what they have been hiding. If you made it this far and you're still with us in Springfield, drop the time and your location in the comments right now. It does not matter if it is 3 in the morning or 3 in the afternoon. It does not matter if you are listening from across the world or from somewhere just down the road. Say hello from wherever you are. And if these kinds of deep, slow, story-driven journeys are something you want more of, subscribe now so you do not miss a single one. We go deep here, and we go slowly, and there is always more to find. Now, let us keep going. Section 2. The Poison in the Water. The Springfield Nuclear Power Plant is a 2-unit pressurized water reactor facility. It sits at the edge of town like something that has always been there, like a natural feature of the landscape, the way a mountain or a river might define the character of a place. If you have grown up watching the show, you have seen those cooling towers in the background of so many establishing shots that they have become almost invisible. They are simply part of what Springfield looks like. They are part of the visual grammar of the show in the same way that the church steeple and the quick E-Mart and the elementary school are part of it. But those cooling towers have a crack in them. Not a metaphorical crack, not a narrative crack. An actual structural crack that runs up the side of the concrete and has been there for as long as we can see the building clearly on screen. And that crack matters in a very literal and very serious way, because a cracked cooling tower is not a cosmetic problem. It is a containment failure. It is a path through which what is supposed to stay inside the building does not stay inside the building. A surprise safety inspection of the Springfield Nuclear Power Plant conducted during one of the show's early seasons found 342 violations. 342. Let that number settle for a moment. Think about what it would take to accumulate that many violations in a single facility. The inspectors would have had to work their way through every system, every pipe, every valve, every storage container, every emergency protocol, and find something wrong at every single turn. 342 individual failures of safety compliance. 342 moments where the rules that exist to prevent a nuclear facility from poisoning its surrounding community had been ignored, bypassed, or simply never followed in the first place. The estimated cost to bring the plant up to code was $56 million. Charles Montgomery Burns, the plant's owner and operator, is a multi-billionaire. The $56 million was, by any reasonable calculation, a trivial fraction of his personal wealth. He could have fixed every single one of those violations without meaningfully reducing his fortune. The money was not the obstacle. He refused. He refused not because he lacked resources, but because fixing the problems would have meant acknowledging that the problems existed. And acknowledging that the problems existed would have meant that someone might start asking questions about what those problems had already done to the people living downwind of a nuclear facility with 342 safety violations and a crack in its cooling tower. The violations the show depicts are not abstract regulatory technicalities. They are visceral. They are specific. Radioactive waste being dumped directly into bodies of water. Radioactive waste being dumped onto children's playgrounds. Plutonium being used as a paperweight on someone's desk. Cooling towers patched with wad after wad of chewing gum. Luminous rats running through the walls of the facility, their bodies faintly glowing with whatever they had absorbed from their environment. And human skeletons in the basement. The show mentions this once and never returns to it. During an episode that takes inventory of the plant's many problems, There is a reference to human skeletal remains in the basement of the facility. Nobody explains who those people were. Nobody explains how they ended up there. Nobody in Springfield or in the show's narrative asks a single follow-up question about the bones of unidentified human beings discovered inside a working nuclear power plant. The information is offered as a throwaway detail, one item on a long list of horrors, and then the scene moves on. And Springfield moves on with it. The man responsible for preventing all of this, the person whose entire professional purpose is to stand between the facility and the surrounding community and ensure that nothing dangerous crosses the boundary, is Homer Simpson. Homer Simpson is the safety inspector at the Springfield nuclear power plant. Homer Simpson has, according to the show's own creator, an IQ of 55. In one episode, it is revealed that a crayon has been lodged in Homer's brain since childhood, physically reducing his cognitive function by pressing against the neural tissue responsible for higher-order thinking. Even without the crayon, Homer sleeps at his workstation with such regularity that the desk appears to have molded itself to his resting shape. He eats donuts during meltdown warnings. He has caused multiple nuclear incidents through actions so spectacularly negligent that they would be difficult to replicate through conscious effort. At one point, he threw a donut into the reactor core to see if the radiation would make it grow larger. This is the person standing between Springfield and radioactive catastrophe. This is the person who has been standing there failing at that job for over 30 years. Now, here is where the theory begins to develop teeth. Because the show has not simply created a dangerous nuclear facility as a setting for jokes about Homer's incompetence. The show has, with extraordinary patience and extraordinary consistency, been drawing a line from that facility to every single strange characteristic of every single resident of Springfield. And the line is not subtle once you start following it. The very first visible mutant in Springfield appears in Season 2. A fish. 3 eyes, 2 on the sides of its head where they belong, and 1 placed above them in the center, like something evolution would never have produced without external intervention. The fish is pulled from a river that runs near the nuclear plant. The show calls it Blinky. Blinky becomes national news within the show's universe. A gubernatorial candidate uses Blinky as evidence that Charles Montgomery Burns has been poisoning the environment. Burns is forced to eat the fish on live television to demonstrate that it is safe. The town watches. The town shrugs, and the town moves on. Nobody conducts a follow-up study. Nobody tests the water from which the 3-eyed fish was pulled. Nobody asks the question that every reasonable person watching this scene should be asking, which is this. If the fish that live in the water near the nuclear plant have developed a 3rd eye as a result of whatever is coming out of that plant, what is happening to the people who are drinking the same water? The show does not answer this question directly, but it does answer it. It answers it through the residents of Springfield themselves. Look at the people who live in this town, Look at them carefully. The way you might look at a photograph you have seen 1,000 times and suddenly notice a detail that was there all along but that you somehow never registered before. Homer Simpson. Massive overbite. Eyes that bulge outward from his skull in a way that is consistent with thyroid dysfunction caused by radiation exposure. 4 fingers on each hand, a reduction from the human norm that suggests a genetic alteration at the most fundamental biological level. A skull shape that does not correspond to normal human cranial anatomy. An IQ so low that it qualifies as a clinical cognitive disability. And a body that has absorbed physical trauma that would kill a normal human being many times over. He has been shot. He has been electrocuted. He has fallen from significant heights repeatedly and walked away. He has been hit by cars, caught in explosions, and survived situations that defy all biological plausibility. His healing rate is not that of a normal human. His pain tolerance is not that of a normal human. His ability to survive and recover from catastrophic physical damage is not normal, and it is not explained as a cartoon convention within the show's own narrative. It is depicted as something specific to Homer, something that the characters around him occasionally remark upon, something that belongs to him as a characteristic in the same way that his yellow skin and his 4 fingers belong to him. Marge Simpson. The same bulging eyes, the same 4 fingers. Hair that defies the laws of physics and gravity in a manner that no amount of product or styling could explain. She has maintained that tower of blue hair in precisely the same shape, at precisely the same height, for the entire run of the show. It does not move in wind. It does not flatten under hats. It rises straight up from her head with the structural integrity of something that has been altered at the biological level rather than simply styled with great care. Marge worked at the nuclear power plant herself. She was employed there, exposed to the same facility, the same violations, the same leaking systems, the same air and the same water that her husband has been breathing and drinking for decades. And all three of their children were born after both parents had already been living in Springfield's contaminated environment for years. Bart, Lisa, Maggie, all three born in Springfield, all three raised in Springfield, all three drinking the same water, breathing the same air, growing up in the shadow of those cracked cooling towers. And every single one of them displays physical characteristics that do not occur in normal human populations. The spiky hair that maintains its architectural structure without products or styling aids, the overbites, the bulging eyes, the skin, the yellow skin. Every resident of Springfield is yellow. Every single one. The color is not jaundice, which produces a yellowish tinge in the whites of the eyes, and the skin when the liver is failing. The color is not a tan or a sunburn or any other normal variation in human skin pigmentation. It is a uniform, consistent, saturated yellow that covers every character who lives in Springfield, regardless of their stated ethnicity, regardless of their ancestry, regardless of any individual biological variation that should produce a range of different skin tones in a population of any reasonable diversity. Everyone who lives in Springfield is the same color. And here's the detail that makes this observation something more than a passing observation about animation style. When celebrities visit Springfield, when guest characters arrive from outside the town, they look different. They do not look Springfield yellow. Their proportions are different. Their eyes are shaped differently. Their features more closely approximate the anatomy of actual human faces. The show draws outsiders with more naturalistic proportions than it draws Springfield residents. The standard explanation is that this is the art style. Outsiders are drawn slightly differently to distinguish them visually from the regular cast. This is a completely valid production explanation. It is almost certainly the practical reason why the show makes this choice. But within the logic of the show's own universe, within the world where these characters are real people living real lives, what the show is depicting is an observable, visible difference between the people who live inside the contamination zone and the people who live outside it. The people inside look mutated. The people outside look normal. The animals support this reading. Santa's little helper, the Simpson family dog, has the same bulging eyes as his owners, the same proportions that deviate from normal canine anatomy. Blinky the fish grew a third eye. Springfield's wildlife, the creatures that live in the water and the land and the air around the nuclear plant, is demonstrably and visibly mutated. The show tells you this directly. It shows you a three-eyed fish and says, in explicit narrative terms, this is what the radiation is doing to living organisms in this environment. And then, without ever quite saying it outright, it shows you the people who live in that same environment and asks you to notice whether they look different from the people who do not. They do. They look very different. Now let us think about Mr. Burns. Burns knows. The show makes this explicit across multiple episodes, and once you see it clearly, you cannot unsee it. Burns funds private medical research. He has personal physicians who administer to him on a regular and extremely intensive schedule. He undergoes a weekly medical regimen so extreme, so loaded with chemicals and what the show implies is radiation therapy of some kind, that it causes his body to emit a visible green glow. The treatments keep him alive for exactly one more week. Without them, he dies. The margin for error in his survival is precisely zero. Burns is not surviving on his own biological merits. He is being kept alive artificially by a recurring medical intervention that he can never miss and can never reduce. And he requires this intervention because his body has been so fundamentally altered by his relationship with radiation that it can no longer sustain itself through normal cellular processes. He is powered by radiation. He is maintained by radiation. He is, in the most literal sense the show can depict without stating it outright, a product of the same exposure that his facility has been subjecting to Springfield's residents for decades. The difference between Burns and every other resident of Springfield is not that Burns is unaffected by the radiation. It is that Burns has the resources and the knowledge to manage his radiation-related physiological alterations in a way that keeps him functional and alive, while everyone else in Springfield has no such resources, no such knowledge, and no understanding that they need either. Burns knows what radiation does to biological systems because he is personally dependent on managing its effects in his own body. He has a pharmaceutical division capable of synthesizing experimental treatments. He has physicians whose entire professional practice is dedicated to maintaining his particular and extraordinary medical needs. He understands at a technical and scientific level that no one else in Springfield can match exactly what the plant is doing to the people who live near it. And he has made a decision. The decision is not to stop. The decision is not even to reduce the damage. The decision is to ensure that the facility continues to operate exactly as it has always operated, that the violations remain uncorrected, that Homer Simpson remains at his post in the safety inspector's chair eating donuts and sleeping through warning alarms, and that the residents of Springfield continue to live their lives in the radioactive shadow of a facility that is slowly and systematically rewriting their biology. Homer's employment is not accidental. It is strategic. When a group of German investors briefly purchased the plant, the first thing they did was fire Homer. They assessed the situation with fresh eyes and immediately identified Homer Simpson as the central problem in the facility's safety record. They also assessed the cost of bringing the plant up to code, encountered an estimate that threatened to bankrupt them entirely, and ultimately sold the plant back to Burns. And Burns, upon reacquiring the plant, immediately rehired Homer. A competent safety inspector would shut the plant down within a week. A competent safety inspector would look at 342 violations, at cracked cooling towers and radioactive waste on playgrounds and human skeletons in the basement, and would close the facility and notify federal authorities and begin the process of addressing what had been done to the surrounding population. Homer ensures this never happens. Homer, by his incompetence, by his sleep and his donuts, and his fundamental inability to process the reality of what he is surrounded by, ensures that the violations continue and the radiation keeps leaking and the water stays poisoned. And Burns maintains his monopoly over Springfield's power supply, its economy, and by extension, its entire population. A population that, by this point in the theory, we might reasonably suspect is too cognitively affected by decades of radiation exposure to fully understand what is happening to them. The show confirms this suspicion with one of its most remarkable episodes. In Season 12, a doctor removes the crayon that has been lodged in Homer's brain since childhood. Without the crayon pressing against his neural tissue, Homer's IQ rises dramatically. He becomes articulate. He becomes capable of complex reasoning. He becomes able to see his own life, his job, his town, his situation, with a clarity that he has never been able to access before. And what he sees, when he can finally see clearly, is unbearable. He sees Springfield for what it actually is. He sees his job for what it actually is. He sees the relationships and the patterns and the structures that have defined his entire life, and for the first time, he understands them. And that understanding does not bring him happiness. It brings him a grief and an alienation so profound that he cannot sustain it. He cannot bear to be the person he becomes when the crayon is removed. So he has it put back. He chooses stupidity. He chooses the fog. He returns the crayon to his brain, and the intelligence drains away, and he becomes Homer again, familiar and comfortable and unable to see the architecture of his own cage. The show presents this as both tragic and sweet, which is exactly how the best episodes of The Simpsons present most things. But underneath the sweetness, there is a question the show drops in without quite answering. How did a crayon get lodged in a child's brain in the first place? How did Homer go through his entire childhood, his entire adolescence, every doctor's visit and school physical and medical examination of his adult life in Springfield, and not a single medical professional found a foreign object in his skull? Either every doctor in Springfield is catastrophically incompetent, which, given the broader pattern of institutional failure in the town, is not impossible, or someone knew the crayon was there and chose not to remove it. And if the medical establishment in Springfield is compromised, if the doctors are looking the other way while radiation and brain damage quietly reduce their patients' capacity for critical thinking, then the crayon is not just an accident. It is a symbol the show uses to tell you something it cannot quite bring itself to say directly. The people of Springfield have something wrong with their brains, something that keeps them docile, something that keeps them unable to stand at the edge of town, look back at those cooling towers, and ask the most fundamental question a thinking being can ask. Why are we all like this? The radiation theory does not explain one mystery about The Simpsons. It explains all of them. The characters do not age because their biology has been altered at the cellular level in ways that affect normal biological processes, including aging. The town resets after catastrophic events because the population's capacity for memory and critical thinking has been compromised by chronic neurological exposure. Homer survives injuries that should kill him because his body has adapted to radiation exposure in ways that make him nearly indestructible, though cognitively devastated. Burns stays alive through treatments that would kill a normal person because he has been managing his own radiation exposure for over a century with resources nobody else in town has access to. And nobody in Springfield questions any of this because the same environmental toxin that has mutated their bodies has also affected the part of their brains responsible for asking why. Springfield is not a quirky cartoon town. Under the radiation theory, it is a contamination zone. The residents are not eccentric. They are symptomatic. And the nuclear power plant that dominates their skyline, that provides their electricity, that employs their neighbors and poisons their water and irradiates their children, is not a background gag. It is the cause. It has always been the cause. Every yellow face and every bulging eye and every impossible recovery from what should have been a fatal injury and every forgotten catastrophe and every reset and every unexplained physical characteristic traces back to the same cracked cooling tower, leaking the same invisible contamination into the same water supply, feeding the same damaged brains that cannot figure out why their fish have 3 eyes and their children have 4 fingers. The plant is not just part of the show. Under this theory, the plant is the show. And nobody in Springfield will ever figure that out because the plant already made sure they could not. Section 3. Homer's Long Sleep. On April 1st, 1993, The Simpsons aired an episode called So It's Come to This, a Simpsons clip show. The premise was a standard April Fool's escalation. Bart played a series of pranks on Homer, each one slightly larger than the last, until he arrived at the most consequential one. He took one of Homer's beer cans to an auto body shop and placed it inside an industrial paint shaker. He shook the can for an extended period of time, building the pressure inside to something extraordinary. Then he returned the can to the refrigerator and waited. Homer found the can. Homer opened it. The explosion was violent enough to send him to the hospital. While Homer was lying in his hospital bed, he noticed a vending machine across the room. This being Homer, he immediately wanted something from it. He crossed the room, reached for the machine, and the machine tipped forward and fell on him. Homer Simpson flatlined. He entered a clinically unconscious state. A coma. A real one, depicted in canonical terms within the show's regular continuity. Not in a dream sequence or a Treehouse of Horror episode, but in the main timeline of the series. The episode ends with Homer seemingly waking up. Bart cries at his bedside and confesses that the whole sequence of events was his fault. Homer springs awake and immediately begins strangling his son. The family laughs. Homer laughs. The credits roll. The show tells you he woke up. And then, in the final moments of the episode, it also tells you that Homer lost 5% of his brain function during the coma. Not temporarily. Not in a way that will heal over time. 5% of his brain function permanently destroyed, never coming back. And Homer's response to learning that he has sustained permanent neurological damage is to laugh, even though he also says in the same breath that he does not understand why he is laughing. The family finds this charming. Nobody finds it alarming. The episode ends. The Simpsons continues for 32 more years, unless it does not. This is the Homer coma theory. It is the most popular, the most debated, the most internally consistent, and arguably the most emotionally devastating fan theory in the entire history of The Simpsons. Its basic premise is simple, almost brutally simple. Homer did not wake up from his coma. The waking scene at the end of So It's Come to This is either a dream or a misread of what the episode is actually depicting. Homer is still in that hospital bed. He has been in that hospital bed since April of 1993. And every single episode that has aired since that date, every storyline and every adventure and every guest appearance and every trip to a foreign country, and every time Homer has met a president or joined a secret society or traveled to outer space, all of it is a dream. A dream being generated by the dimming mind of a man lying unconscious in Springfield General, slowly losing brain function while his family waits beside him. The evidence for this theory is, once you see it, impossible to unsee. The first piece of evidence is tonal. Before the coma episode, The Simpsons was a grounded show. It was always a cartoon, always heightened, always willing to use satire and exaggeration as tools. But the storylines were recognizable. They dealt with things real families experience. Homer struggles to quit drinking. Marge considers whether she married the right person. Lisa develops a complicated emotional attachment to a substitute teacher who briefly makes her feel seen and understood. Bart faces genuine academic consequences and has to reckon with the possibility of being held back a year. These are everyday domestic struggles. They have the texture of real life. They are told through the lens of satire, but they are rooted in the kind of situations that actual people actually navigate. After the coma, everything changes. And the change is not subtle. It is not a gradual drift. It is a seismic shift in the fundamental nature of the show. Homer goes to space. Mr. Burns captures the Loch Ness Monster. Homer becomes the leader of a vigilante group. Homer joins a secret society with ancient rituals and elaborate ceremonies. Homer discovers that his mother, whom he believed dead, is actually a fugitive radical who destroyed a billionaire's biological weapons laboratory in 1969. Homer meets God twice. He travels through time. He visits dozens of countries. He holds hundreds of different jobs, some of them within the same season. He befriends celebrities, encounters historical figures, and survives physical trauma that would kill not just one person, but an entire military unit. The escalation is so dramatic that it has been debated for decades. The internet has argued about when The Simpsons changed, when it went from the show it was to the show it became, and the debate is usually framed in terms of quality. People say the show lost its heart, or lost its grounding, or lost its willingness to tell small human stories. They say it became too reliant on spectacle, too detached from the domestic reality that made the early episodes feel true. The coma theory offers a different framing. The show did not get worse. The show did not lose its way. The show did not change because the writers ran out of good ideas or because the network pushed them toward broader, louder, more spectacular storytelling. Homer's brain got worse. And here's the detail that has haunted people who have thought about this theory seriously. 6 months before the coma episode in the season 4 premiere, Homer has a conversation with God. An actual face-to-face conversation depicted within the show's regular continuity. And during that conversation, God tells Homer something. He tells Homer that he will one day learn the meaning of life, but not yet. God says that Homer's time is coming. 6 months later, Homer is in a coma. The timeline matches perfectly. God told Homer in explicit terms that his time was nearly up, that there was something coming, that the world as Homer knew it was approaching a kind of threshold. And 6 months later, Homer's conscious life ended. What the show presents as a quirky theological gag, the kind of low-key surreal humor that made early Simpsons so distinctive, reads under the coma theory as something else entirely. It reads as a prophecy. God was telling Homer that his waking life was about to end, and that everything that followed would be the dream of a man who could no longer open his eyes. Now consider the aging problem through this lens. Nobody in Springfield ages. We established this at the beginning of tonight, and we noted that the floating timeline is the industry's standard explanation. But the floating timeline has never quite satisfied people who think about it too carefully, because the floating timeline is a production convention, and not an in-world explanation. It tells you why the show is structured the way it is from a production standpoint, but it does not tell you, within the world of Springfield itself, why children never grow up. The coma theory has an answer that is not a production convention. It has an answer that is, in its own strange way, genuinely heartbreaking. Nobody ages because they exist inside the mind of a man who fell asleep in April of 1993 and never woke up. Homer's children do not age because he was not there to watch them age. His unconscious brain cannot imagine Bart turning 11 or Lisa turning 9 or Maggie taking her first steps because those things happened after the vending machine fell, after the lights went out, after Homer was no longer there to see them. His memory of his children is frozen at the last moment he saw them. Bart was 10, Lisa was 8, Maggie was 1. And so in the dream, they remain 10 and 8 and 1, preserved exactly as they were on the day the simulation started. Marge does not age because the last time Homer saw her, she looked exactly the way she looks in every episode. His friends do not change because his memory of them is frozen at the moment of the accident. Every person in Springfield is preserved in amber inside Homer's dream, held at the age and the shape and the personality that Homer last knew them to have because that is all his dimming mind has to work with. The celebrity appearances that flood the later seasons of the show also make sense under this theory. Homer's unconscious brain is not entirely sealed off from the outside world. He is lying in a hospital room. There is a television in the room, or a radio, or the sounds of conversations happening at his bedside. Voices of family members and doctors and nurses talking about the world as it continues to exist outside his coma. His brain receives these sounds, these fragments of external reality, and incorporates them into the dream. Every celebrity who shows up in Springfield is actually a voice Homer heard through the fog of unconsciousness. A name on the radio. A face on a television visible through his closed eyelids. His dreaming brain absorbs these fragments of external media and weaves them into the simulation, giving them bodies and dialogue and storylines, because the dream needs to be populated, and Homer's mind is using whatever material it can find. The show itself has acknowledged this theory, in the oblique and deniable way that the show tends to acknowledge the most uncomfortable truths about itself. In a relatively recent season, the writers created and released what appeared to be a deleted scene in which Homer wakes up from a long coma to reveal that the entire run of outlandish later episodes had been a dream. The scene was detailed, it was animated, it was voiced. The show distributed it with an attribution to hackers, claiming it was a fake deleted scene planted without the writer's knowledge. But the writers made it. They animated Homer waking up from a coma. They chose to engage with the fan theory. They chose to depict, in actual produced animation, the moment that the coma theory has always been waiting for. And then they wrapped it in a layer of deniability, called it a hoax, pointed at imaginary hackers, and told the audience to forget about it. And the audience, like a good Springfield resident, moved on. Executive producer Al Jean addressed the theory directly in 2015. He said it was not true. He called it fan speculation. He dismissed it. But here's what Al Jean did not address. He did not explain why nobody in Springfield ages. He did not explain the tonal shift after season 4. He did not explain why God told Homer his time was coming 6 months before the coma. He did not explain why the show becomes progressively more surreal and detached from recognizable reality with each passing season, exactly as you would expect from a dream being generated by a brain that is slowly losing function. He did not explain why Homer can survive anything, endure anything, recover from anything that should kill him. He just said it was not true, and the interviewer moved on. But here's what the theory offers that no official denial can take away. The coma theory makes The Simpsons make sense, not just in plot terms, not just as an explanation for why nobody ages or why the stories become increasingly impossible. It makes the show make sense emotionally. It gives the whole structure of the series, every episode, every reset, every adventure that ends with Homer back on the couch with his family and family, an emotional logic that is clean and true and quietly devastating. If Homer is dreaming, then the central emotional fact of the dream is transparent in every episode. Homer wants his family. That is all. He wants Marge to still love him. He wants Bart to still be his mischievous, exasperating, beloved son. He wants Lisa to still be playing her saxophone in her room, filling the house with music that Homer cannot quite follow, but that he loves anyway because it comes from her. He wants Maggie small enough to hold, light enough to carry, new enough that the world is still a marvel to her. He wants Friday night at the Simpsons house to last forever. And in the coma, it does. The dream gives him exactly what he wants. His children never grow up. His wife never leaves. His life never ends. Every episode wraps up. Every crisis resolves. Every catastrophe is undone by the next morning. Because in Homer's dream, the story cannot end badly. The story cannot end at all. His mind will not allow it, because allowing it would mean waking up. And waking up means finding out how much time has passed. How old his children really are. Whether Marge waited. Whether anyone is still sitting by his bed. Or worse. Not waking up at all. The coma theory does not ruin The Simpsons. It makes every episode an act of love. Every Sunday night, a dying man dreams about his family. He dreams them unchanged, just as he left them, just as he loved them. He sends himself to space and joins secret societies and befriends celebrities not because those things matter to him, but because his dreaming mind needs to fill the time, needs to generate enough story to keep the simulation running, needs to hold the world together for one more episode, one more week, one more cycle of the dream that is all he has left. And every time Homer finds his way home by the end of the episode, every time the credits roll and Evergreen Terrace is exactly as it was, it is not lazy writing. It is Homer's brain refusing to let the story end. Because if the story ends, if the dream finally stops, then Homer has to reckon with what is on the other side of it. And so it does not end. It has not ended in 32 years. And it will not end tonight as you drift towards sleep in your own safe place, with the sounds of Springfield still humming softly around you. Section 4. Who really shot Mr. Burns? The summer of 1995 was unlike any other summer in the history of American animated television. It was the summer that The Simpsons pulled off something that had never been attempted by a cartoon before. A genuine mystery, a real whodunit, designed with the meticulous care of a classic detective story, promoted with the fervor of a national event, and unresolved for an entire season hiatus, while America argued about who had done it. Who shot Mr. Burns? Before we examine the answer the show gave us, and before we examine the many very serious problems with that answer, let us go back to the beginning of the mystery and walk through it carefully. Because the setup matters enormously. The setup is what makes the question so interesting. The setup is what makes the official resolution so persistently unsatisfying to so many people who have thought about it carefully. Season 6 of The Simpsons ends with an episode called, straightforwardly, Who Shot Mr. Burns? Part 1. By the time the episode arrives at its climactic shooting, Burns has done something extraordinary even by his own historical standards of villainy. He has stolen an oil well discovered beneath Springfield Elementary, taking the resource that would have funded the school for years and redirecting it to his own purposes. He has shut down Moe's Tavern by bankrupting its owner through a combination of legal manipulation and economic pressure. He has caused the destruction of the Springfield Retirement Castle, creating a sinkhole that swallowed the building and displaced its elderly residents. He has injured Santa's little helper, the Simpson family dog. And for his final and grandest act, he has built a device, a giant mechanical disc, and used it to block out the sun over the entire town of Springfield. Not in a metaphorical sense, not as a figure of speech or a piece of hyperbole. Burns literally, physically, mechanically blocked the sun from reaching Springfield. He stole the warmth and light from an entire community so that every resident would be forced to buy their electricity from his power plant rather than relying on free solar energy. By the end of Part 1, every single person in Springfield had a reason to want Burns dead. The show took its time establishing this. Homer, because Burns had never once been able to remember his name despite Homer working for him for years. Bart and Lisa, because the school lost its oil well funding. Grandpa, because the retirement home was destroyed. groundskeeper Willie because he lost his job, a jazz musician named Tito Puente because Burns cut the music program, Mo because his bar went under, even Smithers, Burns's longtime devoted assistant, who had just been fired for the first time in their relationship after protesting the sun-blocking scheme. The entire town gathered at a public meeting to confront Burns. Tension was high enough that multiple characters were depicted openly carrying weapons. The confrontation built, and then Burns collapsed. One gunshot wound. He staggered to the town sundial, fell against it, and his hands landed on two letters: W and S. From Burns's own perspective, looking down at the dial from above, they would read as M and S. The ambulance came. The screen went dark. America waited. When Part 2 aired in September 1995, the investigation played out as comedy. Chief Wiggum and the Springfield police fumbled through it. Smithers confessed almost immediately, but his confession collapsed when it became clear he had been blackout drunk at the time of the shooting and had actually shot a completely different person in a completely different location. He shot old Jasper in his wooden leg. Wrong victim, wrong crime, wrong everything. One by one, the suspects with the strongest motives were eliminated. Principal Skinner had an alibi. Mo had an alibi. Tito Puente delivered what the show presents as the greatest alibi in television history. A full musical number explaining that he channeled his rage into the writing of a samba. The investigation stalled until the police found a significant piece of evidence: an eyelash on Burns's suit. DNA analysis linked the eyelash to a Simpson. This directed suspicion to Homer, who also had his fingerprints on the murder weapon, and who had perhaps the most viscerally personal motivation of anyone in town. Burns had never remembered his name. Homer had at times been driven to the edge of a genuine psychological breakdown by this fact. Homer was arrested. He was about to be convicted. And then Burns woke up from his coma and identified his attacker, baby Maggie Simpson. According to Burns, he had encountered Maggie in the parking lot after the town meeting. He attempted to take her lollipop. In the struggle, his gun fell from his holster. Maggie picked it up. The gun discharged. Burns was shot. Mystery solved. Except that it was not solved. Not really. And the more carefully you examine what the show presented as evidence, the less it holds together. Let us start with the contest. Fox invited viewers across America to submit guesses for who had shot Burns. The prize was significant: animated inclusion in a future episode. Thousands of entries came in. According to the DVD commentary for the episodes, no randomly selected sample of entries contained a single correct answer. Not one. The person who ultimately received the prize had not guessed correctly either, and was given a cash payment instead of the promised animated appearance. The writers acknowledged on the same commentary that one person did post the correct answer online on the night of the original broadcast, but this person was using a college internet account that had gone inactive by the time the producers tried to track them down. The one person who figured it out had essentially vanished. The producers issued an open invitation for that person to come forward. As far as anyone knows, they never did. Think about what this means. The show designed a mystery. The show told the viewing public that the mystery was solvable from the clues provided in Part 1. The show ran a national contest around the mystery, and when the answer was revealed, essentially nobody had solved it. Either the clues were inadequate, the red herrings were too effective, or the answer did not logically follow from the evidence in the way the show had implied it would. Now let us look at the clues themselves. Burns falls onto the sundial. His hands point to W and S, or from his perspective, M and S. The show tells us this means Maggie Simpson. M for Maggie, S for Simpson. But Burns himself stated explicitly and on the record within the episode's own dialogue that his hands pointing to those letters was not intentional. He did not deliberately position himself to spell out his attacker's initials. He just fell. The sundial clue, the central visual evidence that the show uses to anchor its resolution, is described by the victim himself as accidental. The biggest clue in one of television's most famous mysteries is, according to the person the clue supposedly came from, meaningless. Then there is the gun. Burns was carrying a firearm in a holster before the shooting. The show establishes earlier in the episode that the holster is empty before the attack takes place. The gun was not on Burns's person when he was shot. It had already been removed from him. This means whoever shot Burns used his own weapon, a weapon that was already missing from him before the crime occurred. This means the shooter was not someone who arrived at the scene intending to shoot Burns. The shooter was not someone who brought a weapon for that purpose. They encountered Burns's gun by chance, or they had taken it from him earlier, and they used it impulsively or in a moment of escalation rather than as part of a premeditated plan. Most of the suspects at the town meeting had arrived with their own weapons. They had brought guns and clubs and other implements because they were angry and they were prepared for confrontation. The person who shot Burns was someone who was not armed, someone who had no weapon and needed to use Burns's own. A baby finding a gun on the ground fits this profile. So do roughly a dozen other characters who were present that night without weapons of their own. Burns's last words before he was shot were, with notable calm, "Oh, it's you." He recognized his attacker. He was not surprised. He was not afraid. He said it the way you might say it to someone you have encountered before and considered no particular threat. "Oh, it's you." The greeting of familiarity without alarm. Does Burns know Maggie Simpson? Has he ever interacted with her in a meaningful way before this episode? The show does not establish any significant relationship between Burns and Maggie before the shooting. Burns barely recognizes Homer, and Homer has worked for him for years. The idea that Burns would see an infant and say, with calm recognition, "Oh, it's you," as if acknowledging a familiar acquaintance, does not hold up when you consider what the show tells us about Burns's relationship to the world around him. And then there is season 18, years after the shooting, in which Homer simply states that he was the one who shot Burns. He says it out loud, on camera, with no apparent concern for the implications. Nobody reacts. Nobody investigates. Nobody reopens the case. Homer confesses to attempted murder, and the show treats it as a throwaway moment, as forgettable as any other line of dialogue. Either Homer is lying for attention or some other reason, which is entirely consistent with his character and therefore cannot be dismissed. Or he is telling the truth, and the official verdict was wrong, and the investigation that led to Maggie's identification as the shooter was either mistaken or deliberately misdirected. And if Homer actually did it, then Maggie was blamed for a crime her father committed. One of the most compelling alternative theories, developed with considerable care by people who have studied both episodes in detail, centers on Marge. Marge had watched Burns destroy her children's school, injure her family's dog, and steal the sunlight from the town where her children were growing up. She had every motivation. She had no weapon of her own, which is consistent with the empty holster evidence. And Burns, according to an earlier episode, had developed a complicated and somewhat obsessive romantic interest in Marge during a period when she worked at the nuclear plant. The argument is that Burns recognized Marge, received the injury, and upon waking, chose not to identify her. He protected her. A man who had been infatuated with Marge Simpson looked at the sundial and let the town draw whatever conclusion it chose to draw, because naming the woman he had feelings for was something he could not bring himself to do. Maggie became the answer because Maggie was convenient. A baby cannot be prosecuted. Chief Wiggum says this explicitly during the episode. No jury anywhere would convict a baby. Maggie was the cleanest possible scapegoat. An infant too young to deny the accusation, too young to understand what she was being accused of, and too young to ever be held accountable for it. If someone in Springfield's power structure wanted to protect the real shooter, Maggie was the perfect solution. The show knows this theory holds water. At the end of part 2, the final shot of the episode is Maggie alone in a room after everyone else has left. She looks around deliberately to confirm that no one is watching, and then she moves her pacifier in a motion that mimics the firing of a gun. The show presents this as confirmation. Maggie did it, and she knows what she did. But it could also be read as something else entirely. Maggie was present at the shooting. She watched it happen. She is a baby, and babies learn by imitation. They observe the behavior of the adults and older children around them, and they replicate what they see. Maggie mimicking the gesture of firing a gun does not necessarily mean she fired one. It may mean that she watched someone fire one, that she was there, small and unnoticed, as babies often are in moments of adult crisis, and that she saw the whole thing and that the motion she performs in that quiet room is not a confession, but a memory. She is not confessing, she is remembering. The alternate endings the writers animated prove that even the people who made the show were not fully committed to the Maggie answer at the time. A complete alternate ending was produced in which Smithers is revealed as the shooter. Fully animated, fully voiced, a complete alternative resolution to the mystery. This ending was later shown in a clip show hosted by Troy McClure, who dismisses it by noting that accepting it would require ignoring all the Simpson DNA evidence, which would be, in his words, downright nutty. The line is a direct reference to the O.J. Simpson trial, which had taken place in the same year, in which a jury famously set aside DNA evidence to reach an acquittal. The show is winking at you with considerable force. It is telling you that ignoring evidence happens in real investigations, that official verdicts are not always aligned with physical facts, that the conclusion the people in authority arrive at is not always the conclusion that the truth would reach if given the chance to speak for itself. Who really shot Mr. Burns? The official answer is Maggie. The evidence for that answer, once examined carefully, is a victim who admits his last gesture was accidental, a DNA test that points to the Simpson family rather than any individual, a confession from a character whose credibility is compromised by the circumstances, and an alternate ending that was fully produced and then discarded. The official answer was not discovered through investigation. It was chosen. And the clues were adjusted to fit the choice after the choice had been made. In Springfield, the case is closed. In Springfield, closed and solved are two very different things. Section 5. The Immortal Man. Charles Montgomery Burns was born sometime in the late 1800s. The exact date is difficult to pin down because the show's continuity on this particular question is, like most things in Springfield, deliberately flexible. Different episodes suggest different years. Different references to historical events place his birth in different decades. But the broad outline is consistent across every version of the timeline. Burns was alive before the turn of the 20th century. He has personal memories of events that occurred before most of the show's audience was born. He is not claiming to remember these things secondhand, through books or stories or the accounts of older people. He experienced them. He was there. By the most conservative estimate, Burns is well over 100 years old. By the most generous reading of the show's many and contradictory hints, he may be approaching 140. And he does not simply exist at this age, he functions. He runs a corporation worth billions of dollars. He manipulates municipal politics with a sophistication that suggests not just intelligence, but deep institutional knowledge, an understanding of how power works that can only come from having watched it work for a very long time. He orchestrates schemes that require sustained cognitive effort, long-term planning, and understanding of current technology, current finance, and current law, and the patience to pursue goals across timescales that normal human beings cannot maintain. His body is failing. His physical strength is somewhere below minimal. He has been described, on multiple occasions, as being so frail that a gentle breeze might affect his structural integrity. There are episodes where he appears to be little more than a collection of ancient bones held together by an expensive suit and an extraordinary will. But his mind is different. His mind is sharp. Burns is arguably the most functionally intelligent character in Springfield. He reads situations with remarkable precision. He understands people, their motivations, and their weaknesses in a way that suggests a lifetime of careful observation. He is ruthless in pursuit of his goals in a manner that requires not just ambition, but the capacity for sustained, sophisticated strategic thinking. He has been operating at this level for longer than any human being should be capable of sustained consciousness. The show addresses this directly in the Springfield Files episode, which we have already touched on in the context of the radiation theory. Burns undergoes a weekly medical regimen so extreme that it causes his body to produce a visible green glow. He wanders out of the treatment facility in a dazed, euphoric state, stumbling through the woods near Springfield like something from a science fiction film. His body emits light, actual, visible light. The treatments keep him alive for exactly 1 more week. Without the next dose, he dies. The margin for error is 0. His biological survival is maintained with the same kind of precision that you might apply to a critically unstable machine, something that requires exact calibration to remain operational, something where a single missed maintenance cycle means permanent failure. Burns is not surviving through natural biological processes. Burns is surviving because he has access to a recurring medical intervention that no one else in Springfield has access to, and he must receive this intervention on a weekly schedule with complete reliability, without exception, without delay for the rest of his life. And the treatment, whatever its precise nature, involves radiation. The man who owns a nuclear power plant, the man whose facility has been leaking radioactive material into Springfield for decades, the man who profits from the same nuclear technology that has, under the radiation theory, fundamentally altered the biology of every resident of his town. This man is personally dependent on controlled radiation exposure to sustain his own biological functions. Burns is not just profiting from radiation, he is powered by it. His body has been so thoroughly altered by a lifetime of proximity to nuclear material, and before that by whatever other methods his extraordinary wealth has allowed him to pursue across more than a century of life, that it can no longer sustain itself through normal cellular processes. He requires external radiation input the way a normal person requires food and water. Take it away for a week and his system shuts down. This explains the Three Stooges syndrome. In one of the show's most famous scenes, a doctor informs Burns that he has every disease known to medical science. Every single one simultaneously present in his body at the same time. The doctor explains that these diseases exist in a state of perfect equilibrium, each one canceling the others out. They are all trying to kill him at once, which means that none of them can advance, because every illness is blocked by every other illness trying to occupy the same biological space. The doctor calls it a state of functional indestructibility through catastrophic saturation. The show plays this as comedy. It is one of the most quoted scenes in the series. But if you accept the radiation framework, it makes a particular kind of dark scientific sense. Burns's diseases are not in equilibrium through any natural biological process. The weekly radiation treatments are managing them. The treatments do not cure the diseases. They do not eliminate any individual illness. They simply maintain the balance among all of them, keeping every disease in perfect stasis relative to every other disease, preventing any single condition from gaining dominance and beginning the process that would eventually kill him. It is not medicine in any conventional sense. It is nuclear maintenance. Burns's body is a reactor, and the weekly treatments are the equivalent of adjusting the control systems to prevent the whole thing from going critical. And the person who manages this process is Smithers. Waylon Smithers has been Burns's devoted assistant for the entire run of the show. His devotion has been analyzed from many angles, most of them focusing on the emotional dynamics of his attachment to a man who does not, in any conventional sense, deserve it. But there is a layer of the Smithers-Burns relationship that is rarely discussed in terms of its practical consequences, and it matters enormously in the context of the immortality question. Smithers manages Burns's schedule. Smithers ensures Burns makes every weekly appointment. Smithers monitors Burns's physical condition with the kind of vigilance that goes well beyond the professional obligations of a personal assistant. He is, in functional terms, Burns's medical coordinator. He is the person who stands between Burns's treatment schedule and the chaos that would result if Burns were left to manage it himself. The show has established repeatedly that if Smithers ever left, Burns would be helpless. Not emotionally helpless, though there is certainly an emotional dependency in the relationship. Physically helpless, unable to maintain the routine that keeps him alive. Without Smithers managing the appointments and the preparations, and whatever logistical apparatus surrounds the weekly treatments, Burns would miss a dose. And a missed dose, within the logic the show has established, is a death sentence. Smithers is not devoted to Burns primarily out of sentiment. Smithers is devoted to Burns because he understands at some level that his absence is a death sentence. He has built his entire professional identity around the management of a man who cannot survive without him. And the knowledge that he holds this power, that Burns's extraordinary longevity is in some meaningful sense dependent on Smithers' continued presence and competence, is part of the foundation of their relationship in a way that neither of them ever quite says out loud. Smithers keeps Burns alive through logistical competence, and that knowledge, held silently between them, shapes everything. Now consider the historical dimension of Burns's longevity. Burns has referenced personal involvement in an absurd number of historical events. He knew Howard Hughes. He attended Yale. He served in World War II, though his conduct during the war was, to put it gently, morally complicated. He stole a $1 trillion bill from the United States government during the conflict and kept it hidden for decades. He has referenced the Gilded Age not as something he read about, but as something he lived through, a period of American history that he experienced as a young man of significant wealth and ambition. His family wealth predates the Industrial Revolution. The Burns dynasty, as the show presents it, is one of the oldest and most continuously powerful lineages in American history, not just wealthy by the standards of a particular generation, but wealthy in the foundational sense, the kind of wealthy that shapes institutions, that builds infrastructure and then charges everyone else to use it, that exists so far above the ordinary operations of law and accountability that those concepts become theoretical rather than practical. Burns inherited this legacy and has been extending it for more than a century. He did not build an empire from scratch. He took control of an empire that was already ancient when it came to him, and he has been maintaining and expanding it ever since. And here's the question the show never quite asks, though it circles around it repeatedly. Is Burns unique? Is his extraordinary longevity a personal achievement, the result of his particular wealth and his particular relationship with radiation and his particular medical infrastructure? Or is it something the Burns family has always done? If the dynasty has maintained its power for as long as the show suggests, through generations that span centuries rather than decades, how did those earlier generations manage it? Before nuclear medicine? Before modern pharmaceutical research? Before any of the technology that currently keeps Burns alive and functional, what methods did previous members of the Burns family use to extend their hold on power and their hold on life beyond the normal human span? The show does not answer this question. But it does establish that the continuity of Burns' family power across generations is so consistent that it cannot be explained by normal inheritance patterns or normal generational succession. Something has been different about the way this particular dynasty perpetuates itself. Something has kept the control concentrated and the memory institutional and the power structures intact across timescales that most families and most organizations cannot maintain. Burns himself has come closer to dying than almost any other character on the show. He has been shot by Maggie. He has been hospitalized more times than the show has bothered to count. He has collapsed, fallen, been attacked, been abandoned in wilderness, been subjected to conditions that would kill a normal person with grotesque efficiency. And every single time he comes back. But here's the distinction that matters. He does not come back the way Homer comes back, through some combination of cartoon resilience and the show's general reluctance to follow physical logic to its conclusion. Burns comes back through infrastructure, through money, through the machinery of wealth that ensures that no matter what happens to his body, there will always be someone standing by with the resources and the knowledge to put him back together. Homer's immortality is passive. He survives because the show needs him to. Burns's immortality is engineered. It is the product of deliberate, sustained, enormously expensive effort over more than a century of life. Every dollar he has ever earned, every institution he has ever corrupted, every politician he has ever purchased, every doctor he has ever retained on a permanent salary, all of it serves one fundamental purpose. Keep Burns alive. Keep the treatments coming. Keep the diseases balanced. Keep the reactor running, because if Burns dies, the empire dies with him. And empires, particularly very old ones, do not permit themselves to die if they can avoid it. The scariest part of the Burns immortality question is not that he might live forever. People have always fantasized about and feared the idea of immortal wealth. That is not new. What is genuinely disturbing about Burns's situation is the closed loop it creates. Springfield's economy depends on the power plant. The power plant depends on Burns. Burns depends on the treatments. The treatments depend on the infrastructure that Burns's wealth provides. The infrastructure requires Burns to remain alive and in control. It is a system that feeds itself, a loop that has no exit point, a cycle in which every element requires every other element to continue functioning. Springfield cannot kill Burns because Springfield cannot survive without Burns. And Burns cannot die because dying would mean the system he built would finally have to answer for what it has done to the people living inside it. He is not immortal. He is something that is in some ways worse than immortal. He is too expensive to die. And Springfield will keep paying that bill for as long as Burns keeps the lights on. Section 6. The Principal Who Wasn't On. September 28, 1997, The Simpsons aired an episode called The Principal and the Pauper. Within the fan community, this episode has a reputation. It is one of the most debated, most criticized, and most cited examples of the show allegedly betraying its own continuity in the entire history of the series. People who love The Simpsons deeply and watched it carefully regard this episode with a kind of grief. It is the episode that, in many fans' estimation, demonstrated that the writers were no longer honoring the world they had built, that they were willing to discard established character history for the sake of a story that the continuity could not support. The episode is called, depending on which fan you ask, either the worst episode the show ever made or the most important episode the show ever made. It is almost certainly both. Here is what happens. Springfield Elementary holds an event to honor Principal Seymour Skinner's 20 years of service to the school. It is a warm, celebratory occasion, the kind of community moment that the show has always depicted with the particular affection it reserves for Springfield's institutions and rituals. And then a stranger walks in. He is a man nobody recognizes. He introduces himself as Sergeant Seymour Skinner, the real Seymour Skinner, a decorated Vietnam War veteran who is believed to have died after being captured as a prisoner of war in Southeast Asia. He survived his captivity, he escaped, he made his way back to America, and he came home to find that someone else had been living his life for the past 2 decades. The man Springfield has known as Seymour Skinner is an imposter. His real name is Armin Tamzarian. Before Vietnam, Tamzarian was a petty criminal, a kid from a background that offered very little in the way of future prospects. He was drafted and sent to the same unit as the real Skinner. And when Skinner was captured and presumed killed, Tamzarian felt responsible. He traveled to Springfield to deliver the news to Skinner's mother, Agnes. But when he arrived, Agnes assumed he was her son. She needed him to be her son. And Tamzarian, who had never been wanted by anyone, who had no family, no home, no identity worth preserving, simply went along with it. He became Seymour Skinner. He took the name and the history and the mother and the life, and he lived inside that stolen identity for 20 years until the real Skinner walked through the door and the whole thing collapsed. Now here's the part of the episode that is either catastrophically lazy or the most honest thing the show ever did, depending on your perspective. Springfield holds a community meeting. Both men are present. The truth is fully exposed. Everyone in the room knows that their principal is a fraud, that the man who has been running their school and parenting Agnes and participating in every aspect of their community for 2 decades is not who he says he is. And the town votes, not on whether to prosecute Tamzarian, not on whether to restore the real Skinner's identity, not on what to do about the legal and ethical implications of 20 years of identity theft. They vote on whether to acknowledge the truth at all, and the vote is unanimous. They choose the lie. Judge Snyder issues a legal decree that Tamzarian is the real Skinner. The actual Seymour Skinner, the war hero who survived a prisoner of war camp and returned home to find his life stolen, is tied to a railroad car and physically expelled from Springfield. And the judge makes it explicitly illegal to ever mention the truth again, under threat of torture. This is what the town chooses. The fan reaction to this episode when it aired was fierce and sustained. Harry Shearer, who voices Skinner among several other characters, stated his displeasure with the storyline publicly. Critics and viewers argued that the episode had destroyed Skinner as a character by revealing that everything we believed about him was a lie. His military service, his relationship with Agnes, his complicated dynamic with Bart, his entire personality and history, all of it had been built on a foundation of fiction. The episode is consistently ranked among the worst in the series, but here is the argument for reading it differently. The episode is completely honest about what Springfield is. It just says the quiet part out loud. Springfield has always operated this way. The town has always chosen comfortable lies over uncomfortable truths. The town has always found ways to forget whatever does not fit the agreed-upon narrative of itself. The town has always provided mechanisms through which inconvenient realities can be reclassified, reinterpreted, or simply removed from the collective memory. The only thing different about the principal and the pauper is that it showed you the mechanism. It showed you the vote. It showed you the legal decree. It showed you the actual expulsion of truth from the community, conducted in the open, in front of witnesses, as an official act of civic governance. Every other time Springfield forgets a catastrophe or erases a contradiction or resets to normal after something world-altering happens, it happens off-screen. The audience simply arrives at the next episode to find things back where they started, with no explanation offered and none apparently required. The reset is invisible. It is built into the structure of the show in a way that makes it feel natural, like the tide going out and coming back in, like seasons changing, like any other cyclical process that happens below the level of conscious notice. The Principal and the Pauper is the only episode where the show lets you watch the reset happen in real time. It lets you see the vote. It lets you hear the decree. It lets you watch the real Skinner get tied to a train and expelled because his existence is inconvenient for the story the town has decided to tell about itself. That is not a comedy beat. That is the show telling you, in precise and unavoidable terms, exactly how Springfield maintains its impossible reality. Through consensus, through deliberate collective denial, through the systematic removal of anyone who insists on holding to a version of events that the community has decided is no longer acceptable. How many times has Springfield experienced something that should permanently alter the town's reality? The list is very long. The town has been destroyed and rebuilt. It has been sealed under a federal dome by the Environmental Protection Agency. It has experienced nuclear near misses, environmental catastrophes of various kinds, alien encounters, and the literal blocking of its sun by a mechanical device built by its own wealthiest resident. It has survived invasions and coups and the collapse of its own municipal government and the revelation of fundamental corruption at every level of its institutional life. And every single time, by the next episode, the slate is clean. Nobody references the previous disaster. Nobody carries the trauma forward. Nobody has nightmares about the dome or the sun-blocking device or any of the other extraordinary things that have happened to Springfield in the course of its long and eventful history. Fans typically accept this as episodic storytelling convention. Each episode is its own contained unit. Events do not carry forward because carrying them forward would complicate the storytelling and limit the range of stories that could be told. This is a valid production explanation. But the Principal and the Pauper offers something different. It offers an in-world explanation. Springfield resets because the town chooses to reset. Collectively, deliberately, through an unspoken social contract that says, we will not acknowledge what happened, we will maintain the agreed-upon version of reality, and we will treat any challenge to that agreed-upon reality as a threat to be neutralized rather than a truth to be integrated. That is not a cartoon trope. That is how communities work. Small towns in particular have a remarkable capacity for collective denial. Things happen that everyone knows about and nobody discusses. Scandals get buried. Crimes get quietly resolved through informal mechanisms that never quite rise to the level of official acknowledgement. Uncomfortable histories get softened and revised until the official version is the only version that most people can readily access. Springfield's amnesia is not a narrative glitch. It is a feature. It is a defense mechanism employed by a population that cannot afford to confront the full reality of their situation, because confronting it would mean following every uncomfortable truth to its logical conclusion. If they remembered the dome, they would have to acknowledge the pollution. If they acknowledged the pollution, they would have to confront the power plant. If they confronted the power plant, they would have to challenge Burns. If they challenged Burns, the economy would collapse. If the economy collapsed, the town would die. So they forget. They vote to forget. They make it illegal to remember. And anyone who remembers too much, anyone who insists on the truth, gets tied to a train. The real Seymour Skinner was Springfield's canary in the coal mine. He was a man who arrived with proof that the official narrative was false. He had documentation. He had his own identity. He had the truth, plainly and simply, on his side. And the town's response was not to thank him for it. The town's response was to criminalize the truth and exile the man who carried it. That is not comedy. That is the show giving you the key to understanding how every other mystery in its history has been managed. Every three-eyed fish that sparked a moment of public concern and then was forgotten. Every safety inspection that found hundreds of violations and led to nothing. Every revelation of municipal corruption that was absorbed and processed, and then quietly released back into the general atmosphere of Springfield without ever producing lasting change. The machinery is always the same. See the inconvenient thing? Hold a meeting. Vote to pretend it was not there. Expel anyone who disagrees with the vote. Springfield does not forget because its residents are cognitively limited, though the radiation theory suggests some component of that may be true. Springfield forgets because remembering is more dangerous than forgetting. And the town discovered this at some point in its history, long before the cameras started rolling. If the coma theory is also true, if everything since 1993 is Homer's dream, then this episode takes on a dimension that is darker still. Homer's unconscious mind invented a scenario in which an entire town holds a democratic vote to sustain a lie, because that is what Homer needs to believe is possible. He needs to believe that lies can be maintained forever through collective agreement. He needs to believe that a stolen identity can become real if enough people choose to treat it as real. He needs to believe that the fake version of a life can replace the genuine one and that nobody will ever force the replacement to end. Because that is what his coma is. A fake life replacing a real one. A dream insisting on its own reality. And as long as Springfield keeps voting to maintain the fiction, Homer never has to wake up. The Principal and the Pauper is not the worst episode of The Simpsons. It is the most important one, because it is the only episode that shows you the infrastructure of Springfield's denial, the machinery that makes every reset possible, the social contract that allows a town full of people with yellow skin and four fingers and fish with three eyes to look at each other every morning and say, with complete conviction, that everything here is perfectly normal. Section 7. The silence of Maggie Simpson. Maggie Simpson does not talk. She does not walk reliably. She communicates through the sounds she makes with her pacifier, through the particular quality of her stares, and through an array of facial expressions that have more range and more precision than most adults manage with their full verbal and physical repertoire. She is, by the calendar of the show, 1 year old. She has been 1 year old for 36 years. And in that time, without saying a single meaningful word in the presence of anyone who is paying attention, without drawing attention to herself in any sustained or deliberate way, without ever making herself the center of anything, Maggie Simpson has accomplished more than every other member of her family combined. She shot a billionaire. She led a daycare rebellion against a tyrannical caretaker, orchestrating a campaign of organized resistance among a group of other infants against the authority of the facility that imprisoned them. She saved her family from multiple life-threatening situations. She demonstrated problem-solving abilities that exceed those of adults multiple times her age. She was formally tested and found to possess intelligence that should not exist in a child who has not yet learned to form sentences. And through all of it, every remarkable thing she has ever done, every problem she has solved, and every danger she has navigated, and every moment where she has seen clearly what the adults around her could not see, she has maintained her silence. Not because she cannot speak, because she has chosen not to. The distinction matters enormously, and it is one of the most carefully constructed subtexts in the entire run of the show. Let us start with the shooting, because it is the defining act of her public identity within the show's universe, even though, as we established in our earlier examination of the mystery, the question of whether she actually pulled that trigger is significantly more complicated than the official verdict suggests. Whether or not Maggie intentionally fired the gun, the aftermath of the shooting is what the theory actually hinges on. A baby was officially identified as the person who shot the richest and most powerful man in Springfield. The police investigated. The evidence was examined. A prosecutorial determination was made. And the official conclusion was that an infant had committed an act of violence against a grown man, and that there was nothing anyone could do about it because the law does not permit the prosecution of babies. Chief Wiggum said exactly this on camera, and that was the end of it. But consider what happened in the episode's final moments. Everyone leaves the room. Maggie is alone. She looks around in a way that is described in the stage directions and depicted on screen as deliberate, as a check of her surroundings, a confirmation that she is unobserved. And then she performs a gesture with her pacifier that precisely mimics the motion of pulling a trigger. She waits until she is alone. She confirms that she is being watched by no one. And then she reenacts, in private, a specific and intentional physical motion that is unmistakably connected to the shooting. That sequence of actions requires situational awareness. It requires memory of the event. It requires an understanding that the gesture has significance. And it requires the impulse control to wait until privacy is assured before performing it. Those are not the characteristics of reflexive infant behavior. Those are the characteristics of someone who understands exactly what they are doing and has determined that secrecy is the optimal strategy. She waited. She checked. She acted. That is not how a baby behaves. That is how an intelligence operating inside a baby's body behaves. Now consider The Longest Daycare, a theatrical short film released in 2012 that was nominated for an Academy Award. 7 minutes of Maggie Simpson, without dialogue, without any verbal communication whatsoever, demonstrating cognitive abilities that would be extraordinary in a competent adult. The premise is simple. Maggie is left at a daycare facility run with the kind of bureaucratic authoritarianism that the show deploys as both satire and genuine unease. Inside the facility, Maggie encounters a caterpillar preparing to become a butterfly. She wants to protect it. Another baby, an established antagonist named Gerald, wants to destroy it. What follows is a 7-minute film in which Maggie outmaneuvers the bully, the staff, and the security systems of the entire facility to protect the caterpillar and ultimately release the butterfly into the world. She does this without speaking. She does it through observation of her environment, identification of threats and opportunities, planning, improvisation, and the kind of adaptive problem-solving that most adults struggle with when placed in unfamiliar, high-pressure situations. She reads the physical space around her. She identifies the behavioral patterns of the other infants and the staff. She develops strategies in real time. She executes multi-step plans that require precise timing, spatial reasoning, and the ability to predict how other people will behave under specific conditions. And she does all of this while her body can barely keep up with what her mind is directing it to do. She falls. She stumbles. She has the physical coordination of a 1-year-old, which is to say she has very little. But her decision-making is flawless. Her judgment is correct at every single choice point. Her intelligence compensates so thoroughly for every physical limitation that the gap between what her body can do and what her mind is directing becomes a central source of both tension and quiet wonder in the film. The show has tested Maggie's intelligence directly on several occasions. The results vary depending on the episode, but the pattern is consistent. Maggie scores at levels that exceed the measurable range of standardized testing designed for children her age. The show plays this as a quick joke and moves on without dwelling on the implications. But the pattern across many episodes, many situations, many moments where Maggie does something that she should not be able to do, is not a collection of isolated gags. It is a portrait of extraordinary, carefully concealed intelligence. Now consider the question of why she conceals it. Maggie is surrounded by the most verbal family on television. Homer narrates his own existence with a running commentary of exclamations and observations and desires. Marge voices her concerns in a steady flow of careful and measured words. Bart is never silent when noise is an option. And Lisa is perhaps the most intellectually engaged and verbally active 8-year-old in the history of the medium. A child who reads advanced literature, plays jazz saxophone, wins academic competitions, and engages every adult in her orbit in intellectual debate. Springfield has produced one recognizably brilliant person, and that person's experience of her intelligence has been a sustained exercise in frustration and isolation. Lisa Simpson is a genius. Lisa Simpson is arguably the most intelligent person in Springfield. And what has that intelligence done for her? It has made her lonely. It has made her different in a way that Springfield does not celebrate. It has made her the kind of person who is always right about things that matter and is always ignored for being right about them. She challenges authority and gets punished. She tries to improve the world around her and encounters resistance so consistent and so institutional that by certain seasons of the show, it reads not just as a recurring narrative pattern, but as a diagnosis of what happens to people who tell uncomfortable truths in places that have decided to criminalize truth. Maggie watched all of this. Maggie has been watching Lisa's life from the beginning of her own. She has watched her sister fight every day for recognition. She has watched the smartest person in the household be consistently overlooked and undervalued by a community that rewards docility and punishes insight. She has watched what happens to visible intelligence in Springfield. And Maggie has arrived at a conclusion that is the opposite of the one Lisa arrived at. Lisa concluded that you keep fighting regardless of the cost, that you keep being visibly, loudly, demonstrably intelligent, because the alternative is a kind of self-erasure that is worse than being ignored. Lisa's integrity demands that she be exactly what she is, in the open, regardless of the consequences. Maggie concluded that silence is power, that invisibility is the most effective form of armor available in Springfield, that the less you are noticed, the more you can accomplish, that the moment you declare your intelligence, you become a target for the same mechanisms that have been directed at Lisa for her entire life. Every remarkable thing Maggie has ever done has happened below the radar. The daycare rebellion succeeded because nobody monitors infants closely enough to see them organizing. The shooting, whether she fired the gun or not, was never seriously investigated in her direction because who suspects a baby? Every act of problem-solving, every demonstration of intelligence, every moment where Maggie has quietly made things better has occurred in the space that adults create by not paying attention to the smallest person in the room. And Maggie has preserved that space with extraordinary discipline by maintaining the most effective disguise available to her. She acts exactly like what everyone expects a baby to be: quiet, passive, dependent, sweet and simple and in need of care. She is none of those things. She is the most capable person on Evergreen Terrace. She is the only member of the Simpson family who has fully understood what Springfield is and made a deliberate strategic decision about how to exist within it without being destroyed by it. And the show has never definitively told us what she is waiting for. That is the final and perhaps most interesting thing about Maggie Simpson. Every other character in the show has a trajectory, however frozen and however cyclically reset. Homer will always be bumbling and loving. Marge will always be patient and holding things together. Bart will always be rebelling. Lisa will always be fighting. Burns will always be scheming. These characters are fixed in their roles the way planets are fixed in their orbits. Maggie is different. Maggie is the one variable in Springfield that has not been assigned a permanent role. Her future is genuinely unknown. The show has shown us glimpses of what she could become, what she has already done, what she is capable of when circumstances demand it. But it has never resolved the question of what she is building toward, what the 36 years of watching and learning and strategic silence have been preparing her for. And that unresolved question is, in its own quiet way, the most unsettling thing about Springfield. Not what Maggie has done, which is remarkable enough, but what she is waiting to do. Behind that pacifier, behind those enormous and impossibly knowing eyes, behind 3.5 decades of deliberate concealment, something is thinking. Something is watching the family and the town and the whole impossible structure of Springfield with an intelligence that nobody suspects and nobody has ever quite managed to contain. When Maggie finally speaks, the full sentence, the real sentence, the one she has been composing for 36 years in the silence that everyone else in her family has been too busy to notice. When she finally tells Springfield what she has seen and what she knows, nobody is going to be ready for it. Section 8, The Prophet or the Mirror. The Simpsons predicted the Trump presidency. This is one of the most shared, most cited, most argued over facts in the long history of the show's relationship with the culture that produced it. In the year 2000, in an episode called Bart to the Future, the show depicted a future in which Lisa Simpson becomes the President of the United States and inherits a catastrophic budget deficit from her unnamed predecessor. That predecessor, briefly but clearly referenced, is identified as Donald Trump. The episode aired 16 years before Trump won the 2016 election. When the prediction appeared to come true, the internet's reaction was something between astonishment and genuine unease. Screenshots circulated. The clip was shared millions of times. The phrase "The Simpsons predicted it" became a cultural shorthand that transcended the show's actual fan base and entered the general consciousness of anyone who used social media in that period. People who had not thought about The Simpsons in years were suddenly asking, with varying degrees of seriousness, how the writers had known. And that is just the headline. The list of apparent Simpsons predictions is long enough to fill multiple dedicated documentaries. In 1995, the show depicted a device worn on the wrist that functioned as a two-way video communication tool, resembling the modern smartwatch in ways that were not cosmetically coincidental. In 1994, Homer went to space in collaboration with a real astronaut, decades before commercial space tourism became a commercially available reality for private individuals. In 1998, Homer appears to work through a mathematical equation on a chalkboard that contains an expression remarkably similar to a formula that would later be associated with the predicted mass of the Higgs boson particle, which was not experimentally confirmed until 2012. In 1993, an episode depicted a flu virus originating in Asia and spreading to Springfield, causing mass panic, supply chain disruption, and a frantic communal search for treatment and containment. The episode aired 27 years before the COVID-19 pandemic. In 1996, a joke involved the hip-hop group Cypress Hill accidentally booking the London Symphony Orchestra for a performance while in an altered state. That exact collaboration happened in reality in 2024, when Cypress Hill performed with the London Symphony Orchestra at the Royal Albert Hall. 28 years separated the joke from the event it appeared to anticipate. In 1998, the show depicted the media corporation that owned Fox, the network that airs The Simpsons, being acquired by Disney. That acquisition happened in 2019. The list goes on and on. Video calling, autocorrect failures on smartphones, surveillance culture, robotic technology, political outcomes, scientific discoveries, cultural events that seemed, when the episodes originally aired, like the kind of absurdist satire that the show excelled at deploying, and that later materialized as reality with an eerie precision that made people reach for supernatural explanations. So how did they do it? The show's own creators are not shy about answering this question. Al Jean, who has been an executive producer on The Simpsons since its earliest seasons and has been in the room for many of the predictions in question, gives an explanation that is blunt and deflating and almost certainly correct. If you throw enough darts, you are going to hit some bullseyes. The Simpsons has produced close to 800 episodes over 36 years. Each episode contains dozens of jokes, references, satirical observations, extrapolations, and speculative scenarios about American culture, technology, politics, and society. When you generate that much content across that long a period, some portion of it will align with future events through simple statistical probability. The volume of content is so large that coincidences are not just possible, but essentially guaranteed. Producer Bill Oakley, who ran the show during several of its most celebrated seasons, put it even more directly. The episodes are so old that history repeats itself. The show is not forecasting the future. The show is making jokes about recurring patterns in American life, and those patterns recur. When a pattern recurs in reality, the old joke suddenly looks like a prediction. Fact-checking organizations have examined many of the most celebrated Simpsons predictions and found that most of them have more mundane explanations than the internet tends to provide. The apparent Trump prediction did not require prophetic insight. Trump had been publicly discussing a possible run for the presidency since the late 1980s. He was a fixture of American celebrity culture with a long and well-documented history of treating political candidacy as a form of brand extension. Writing a joke in 2000 about the logical extreme of celebrity politics pointing toward a Trump presidency required not clairvoyance but basic attention to the cultural landscape of the time. The Disney Fox prediction required noticing that media consolidation was accelerating, that large corporations were systematically acquiring their competitors, and that the trend lines pointed toward an eventual situation where a small number of enormous corporations controlled most of the media consumed by most people. Writing a joke about Disney owning Fox was not a prediction. It was an extrapolation. The smartwatch was not a prediction. It was an observation that technology was getting smaller and more personal, and that the logical destination of that trend was a computer on your wrist. Many people were making that observation in the mid-1990s. The Simpsons made it as a joke. The joke happened to be right. The writing staff of The Simpsons has historically been one of the most educated in American television. Multiple writers over the years have held advanced degrees from elite universities. Many have backgrounds in mathematics, science, computer science, political theory, economics, and history. These are not people pulling random ideas from the air. They are intelligent, broadly educated observers of American culture who spend their careers analyzing patterns, identifying trends, and extrapolating those trends to their logical conclusions. They are not predicting the future. They are reading the present more carefully than most people do and projecting it forward. All of that is true, and all of it explains the majority of what appears in the predictions list. But it does not explain everything, because while the debunking accounts for most of the apparent predictions, there are individual examples that are specific enough, precise enough, and detailed enough to make the statistical probability argument feels slightly strained. The Trump prediction did not just identify that a celebrity might run for president. It named Trump specifically, and in depicting his announcement, it showed him descending a golden escalator surrounded by supporters, which visually mirrors the actual announcement Trump made at Trump Tower in 2015 with remarkable precision. The level of specific visual detail in that parallel goes beyond what simple trend extrapolation would predict. The Siegfried and Roy episode from 2003 depicted a white tiger attacking one of the two performers in a way that caused catastrophic injury. That same year, in reality, Roy Horn was critically injured by one of the act's white tigers during a performance. The tiger attack on a white tiger performing Las Vegas duo, resulting in serious harm to one of the performers, is not a general trend that the show was extrapolating. It is a specific event. And so alongside the statistical explanation and the extrapolation explanation, there is a third explanation that is worth sitting with. The Simpsons does not predict the future. The Simpsons shapes the future, not through magic, not through prophecy, through cultural influence at a scale that is genuinely difficult to overstate. The Simpsons is one of the most widely watched, most frequently quoted, most deeply embedded pieces of American media in history. It has been running for longer than most of its current audience has been alive. Its observations have become part of how Americans understand their own culture. Its vocabulary has entered the language. Its images have become shorthand for ideas and feelings that people reach for without knowing where the shorthand came from. When the show makes a joke about Trump becoming president in the year 2000, that joke enters the cultural bloodstream. Millions of people see it. It becomes a reference point. It becomes something that floats at the edge of cultural consciousness, something people half remember and half associate with the idea of a Trump presidency. The joke does not predict the presidency. The joke makes the presidency feel familiar, makes it feel like something that has already been imagined and processed and accepted as a possible outcome of the trajectory America was on. It primes the cultural imagination. It makes the impossible feel like an inevitability. And when the thing the joke depicted actually happens, the response is not shock. The response is recognition. We have seen this before. The Simpsons already did this. The show did not create the outcome, but by depicting it, by putting it into the shared imagination of millions of people, the show made the outcome feel less like a rupture and more like a punchline arriving on schedule. This is not a small thing. A show that can make the future feel familiar is a show that is participating in the creation of that future in some meaningful sense. Not through conspiracy, not through special knowledge, but through the simple and extraordinary power of having shaped how an enormous number of people understand the world they live in. Springfield does not reflect America. America, over 36 years of continuous exposure to Springfield, has become Springfield. And here's the final piece of the prediction phenomenon that makes it genuinely interesting even after all the debunking is done. The Simpsons has also made thousands of jokes that did not come true. Jokes about jetpacks and moon colonies and political outcomes that went differently and social trends that never materialized. Nobody screenshots those. Nobody builds theories around the predictions that failed. Confirmation bias only operates in one direction. We remember the hits and discard the misses. When you produce 800 episodes containing thousands of satirical observations about American life, and then filter those observations through the most powerful confirmation bias engine ever created, which is the internet with its infinite capacity for selective archiving and selective sharing, you produce a highlight reel that looks exactly like prophecy. The predictions are not supernatural. They are not the product of conspiracy or special access to classified information about the future. They are the natural result of a brilliantly staffed show running for an impossible length of time, generating more satirical content about American life than any other show in history, and having that content filtered and curated by millions of people who remember only what turned out to be right. But try telling that to yourself the next time a Simpsons clip from 1998 lines up with a headline from this year. Because the truth is, even when you understand how the trick works, it is still impressive to watch. 800 episodes, 36 years, thousands of observations, and enough bullseyes to make even the show's own creators occasionally stop and wonder. Section 9. The Mother Who Vanished. For the first 6 seasons of The Simpsons, Homer's mother was dead. That was the official story. Abe Simpson, Homer's father, and had told him that his mother passed away when Homer was young. There was a grave. Homer had mourned, in the particular way Homer mourns things, which is to say, incompletely and periodically and with an undercurrent of confused pain that he cannot quite locate or name. He grew up believing he was a boy whose mother had died, and that belief had settled into the foundation of who he was. The belief shaped everything about Homer Simpson: his desperate need for approval from the people around him, his clinginess toward Marge, and his terror of ever doing anything that might cause her to leave. His willingness to endure humiliation, degradation, and abuse from an employer who cannot remember his name, because the alternative, the possibility of losing his income, his place in the world, is freighted with an anxiety that goes far beyond normal financial concern. His compulsive need to be liked, his instinct toward excess, toward filling himself with food and beer and noise and experience, as if the physical sensation of fullness might address an emotional hollowness that has been present since childhood. Homer Simpson's entire personality, read carefully, is a coping mechanism for maternal loss. He is a man who was told, very early in his life, that he was not enough to make his mother want to stay. In Season 7, an episode called Mother Simpson revealed that this was a lie. Abe had been passing off a different person's headstone as his wife's burial site for the entirety of Homer's childhood and adult life. The grave Homer had visited was the grave of a poet. His mother had never been there at all. When Homer discovers this, when the full truth of what he was told and what actually happened comes together, the show produces one of the most quietly remarkable scenes in its history. Homer finds Mona at a cemetery, visiting what she believes is her son's grave. She is mourning him. She does not recognize the grown man who approaches her because the Homer she last knew was a small child. He has changed so thoroughly in the years of her absence that he is essentially unrecognizable to the person who held him last. When he proves who he is, the reunion is emotionally precise in a way that the show is not always willing to be. A grown man and his mother separated for 27 years, finding each other beside a headstone that belongs to neither of them. And then Mona tells him what actually happened. She did not die. She did not leave because she chose to, not in any simple voluntary sense. She left because she had to. Because the man who now owned the power plant where her son worked, the man whose name appeared on Homer's paycheck every week, had destroyed her life. The story begins in 1969. Mona Simpson was a housewife. She was married. She had a young son. She was, by every visible measure, an ordinary woman living an ordinary life in Springfield, while the world outside was moving through one of the most turbulent periods in modern American history. The civil rights movement, the counterculture, the deepening opposition to Vietnam. And something in all of that reached her. The show depicts it with its characteristic blend of absurdism and genuine emotional weight. Mona was radicalized. She joined a group of activists, and the target they chose was a biological weapons laboratory owned by Charles Montgomery Burns. Stop there for a moment. Burns did not just own a nuclear power plant. Burns owned a germ warfare facility, a laboratory explicitly designed to produce biological weapons, operating in Springfield, in the same community where families were raising their children and sending them to school and drinking the water and breathing the air. Burns was manufacturing weapons-grade pathogens in Springfield. He was doing it quietly, as Burns does most things, operating within the shadow of his legitimate businesses, protected by his wealth and his influence and the general tendency of people in power to extend unusual courtesies to other people in power. Mona's group broke into the laboratory. They detonated what the show describes as an antibiotic bomb, a device designed to destroy the biological agent stored inside rather than to harm anyone. The raid was successful. The pathogens were neutralized. During the chaos of the operation, in the moment when the group was fleeing, Mona made a mistake. She stopped to help someone who had been knocked down in the confusion. That someone was Mr. Burns. She stopped to help the man whose weapons she had just destroyed. Burns looked at her face. He identified her. He reported her to the FBI. And from that moment forward, Mona Simpson was a fugitive. She could not go home. She could not contact her family. She could not hold her son or explain anything to him. She kissed Homer goodbye while he was sleeping and disappeared. Homer was approximately 6 years old. He woke up and his mother was gone. Abe told him she was dead. And Homer spent the next 27 years of his life believing that he was the kind of person whose mother chose death over staying. Now here's the part of this story that becomes genuinely dark when you follow its implications. Burns did not simply report Mona to the FBI and move on. Burns pursued her. For decades, he maintained an active interest in ensuring that Mona could never return to her family, never resume her life, never be free from the fugitive status that his report had created. He used his resources and his connections and his considerable influence to ensure that the woman who had destroyed his biological weapons program remained permanently exiled from everything she had loved. When Mona finally returns to the Springfield in the season 7 episode, when the reunion with Homer happens, and for a brief and precious moment, it seems as though the decades of separation might be healed, Burns spots her. He recognizes her through a window as she travels by cab. He calls the authorities. The FBI arrives at the Simpson house. Mona has to run again. Homer has to say goodbye to his mother for the second time. But this time he knows why. He knows who forced her away. He knows the name of the person responsible for the 27-year absence and for the second flight, and for all of the grief that both separations left behind. The name is on Homer's paycheck. It has been on Homer's paycheck for his entire adult working life. Homer works for Burns. Homer has worked for Burns since before he was old enough to fully understand what the relationship meant. Homer earns his money, his health insurance, his sense of occupational identity from the man who took his mother away from him when he was 6 years old and made sure she could never come back. And Homer does not connect these things. He does not confront Burns. He does not quit. He does not even seem to fully process in any sustained way the relationship between the employer whose name he struggles to understand and the billionaire who destroyed his family. The show does not play this as a joke. It plays it as tragedy, as the specific, terrible tragedy of a man who has been too damaged by too many things to see the architecture of his own suffering clearly enough to know what to do about it. And this is where the conspiracy theory that surrounds Mona Simpson's story becomes most fully formed. Burns did not just ruin Mona's life, he engineered Homer's. By driving Mona away when Homer was a child, by ensuring that Homer would grow up without the mother who loved him, Burns ensured that Homer would become exactly the kind of employee a man like Burns needs. A man who is emotionally damaged and desperately seeking approval and fundamentally incapable of the sustained self-advocacy that would lead him to challenge the conditions of his employment or the behavior of his employer. A man who will stay at a dangerous facility for decades through negligence and fear and the particular paralysis of someone who has already lost too much to risk losing more. The show confirms the transactional dimension of this relationship in a later revelation. Burns at some point committed a crime that Grandpa Simpson discovered. In exchange for Grandpa's silence, Burns guaranteed Homer a job at the plant for life. No matter how many mistakes Homer made, no matter how incompetent or destructive or genuinely dangerous his performance as a safety inspector became, he would never be permanently dismissed. The show has depicted 742 documented errors attributed to Homer's time at the plant. 742 moments where Homer's incompetence created situations that could have been catastrophic. And in none of those moments was Homer permanently removed from his position, because the deal protected him, because the deal required Burns to keep Homer in place, and because keeping Homer in place served Burns' interests regardless of the deal. Homer's job security was never a cartoon convenience. It was a contractual arrangement, brokered in silence between his father and his mother's persecutor, maintained in secret for decades, and never explained to Homer because explaining it would have required explaining everything else. Homer's mother was a woman who fought against a billionaire's biological weapons program and lost 27 years of her life as a result. Homer's father struck a deal with that billionaire and buried the truth in exchange for his son's employment. And Homer himself grew up in the wreckage of those two decisions, damaged at the cognitive level by radiation and by physical brain damage, and by the emotional consequences of being told at 6 years old that his mother chose to leave him and spent his entire adult life working for the man who set all of it in motion. 3 generations of Simpsons, one man's grudge, an entire family's architecture of pain. Mona died in a later season. The scene is spare. Homer is there. He holds her hand. He holds her. He watches his mother leave for the last time. And this time there is no mystery about where she is going and no hope of a future reunion. Just a man and the woman who loved him and the weight of 27 years of enforced absence pressing down on both of them in the last moments they have. No joke, no cutaway, no reset. Burns won. Burns always wins. Because in Springfield, the man who controls the money controls the narrative, and the narrative says that Homer Simpson will work at the nuclear power plant until the day he dies. Because his grandfather made a deal. Because his mother made a choice. Because the richest man in town needed a broken man in Sector 7G. And Homer was broken before he ever clocked in. Section 10. Springfield on no map. Springfield is the most famous fictional town in American history. More people can name it than can name the capital of Vermont. More people can identify its geography, its landmarks, its geography of shops and schools and churches and power plants, than can identify the geography of many actual cities they have visited. The Quickie Mart is more instantly recognizable than most real gas stations. The Springfield nuclear power plant is more culturally familiar than many actual nuclear facilities that exist in the real world. And yet nobody can tell you which state it is in. Not because they have forgotten or because the information has not been provided. Because the information has been actively and deliberately obscured for 36 years through a pattern of contradictions so consistent and so comprehensive that it begins to feel less like an oversight and more like a policy. Springfield has oceanfront property and mountain ranges and vast deserts and active farming land and deep forests, and what appear to be the climatic characteristics of multiple different regions of the United States simultaneously. It borders the states of Ohio, Nevada, Maine, and Kentucky, depending on which episode you are watching. It is in the north when a northern joke needs to land. It is in the south when a southern joke applies. It is in the Midwest when the cultural bleakness of the heartland is what the writers need. It is on the coast when the story requires a harbor. It is everywhere and nowhere. It is the town you grew up in, regardless of where you actually grew up. Matt Groening, the show's creator, said in a 2012 interview that he named the town Springfield partly because he grew up near Springfield, Oregon, and partly because Springfield is one of the most common city names in America. There is a Springfield in nearly every state. For approximately 48 hours after that interview was published, the mystery appeared to be solved. Springfield was in Oregon. Then the show continued. Episodes aired after the interview that placed Springfield in geographic context completely inconsistent with Oregon's climate, coastline, and geographic features. The writers did not honor Groening's confession. They kept the contradictions coming. The mystery that had apparently been solved unsolved itself almost immediately. The show gave you the answer and then took it back. Not subtly, visibly, because the ambiguity is the point. The geographic impossibility of Springfield is not an accident of inconsistent production. It is the show's most durable and most sophisticated structural joke. Springfield is not in any state because Springfield is in all of them. It is the composite American town assembled from the geography and the culture and the institutional landscape of every American community that has ever existed, layered on top of each other without regard for physical plausibility, because plausibility is not what the joke requires. The surface explanation, the one the writers and Groening have offered, is that Springfield is meant to be universal. A town that could exist anywhere, that could belong to any viewer regardless of their actual location, that resonates because it captures something true about American community life rather than something specific about any particular geography. This is true, and it explains the creative choice in exactly the terms that a production decision would be explained. But under the framework of the theories we have been building tonight, Springfield's geographic impossibility is more than a creative choice. Under the radiation theory, if Springfield is a contamination zone where normal biological laws have been warped by decades of nuclear exposure, why should the geography be exempt? If the people inside the zone have 4 fingers and yellow skin and do not age, why should the physical landscape conform to normal geographic rules? Perhaps the contamination does not just affect biology. Perhaps it has altered the physical environment itself, compressing geographic features that should be hundreds of miles apart into a single impossible region, bending space the way it bends the bodies of the people who live inside it. Under the coma theory, Springfield's geography makes immediate emotional sense. Homer's dreaming brain does not have a precise mental map of America. It has impressions and fragments and emotional associations. Mountains from a family vacation, ocean from a trip or a photograph, desert from a movie he half-watched, farmland from a drive through somewhere he was not paying close attention to. His unconscious mind assembled Springfield from every American landscape he ever encountered and held in memory, layering them together without geographic logic, because dreams do not operate according to geographic logic. Dreams operate according to emotional logic. And Springfield feels like America because it is made from Homer's emotional memory of America, scattered and incomplete and held together by longing. Under the collective denial theory from the principal and the pauper, Springfield's location ambiguity is something more practical than creative. You cannot investigate a town you cannot find. You cannot bring federal charges against a nuclear power plant if the state it operates in keeps changing. You cannot hold anyone accountable for anything if the jurisdiction is perpetually undefined. Springfield floats between states because floating is safer than landing. Landing means accountability. Landing means a fixed regulatory authority with consistent oversight, a permanent state attorney general with the ability to investigate the nuclear facility, a defined jurisdiction in which the three-eyed fish and the cracked cooling towers and the billionaire who appears to have been alive since the Spanish-American War can be formally examined and formally addressed. As long as Springfield is geographically uncertain, as long as its state changes depending on the episode, as long as no particular government agency can claim definitive authority over what happens there, the power plant continues to operate without meaningful oversight, and Burns continues to do exactly as he has always done. The geographic uncertainty is a legal shield, and the show deployed it with the precision of a legal team rather than the carelessness of a production that simply could not keep its facts straight. The episode Behind the Laughter, a mockumentary from the 12th season, offered what appeared to be a definitive answer. In its original broadcast, the family was described as being from northern Kentucky. In syndicated reruns, the location was changed to a different state. The definitive answer that the show offered was not definitive. It shifted depending on which version of the episode you were watching. The truth was not fixed, it was conditional. Even when Springfield had an answer, the answer was not stable. Every state in the Union has been theorized as Springfield's actual location at some point in the 36 years of the show's run. Every theory has evidence supporting it. Every theory has contradicting evidence that prevents it from settling into certainty. The show has actively maintained this state of permanent ambiguity across hundreds of episodes and 3 decades of continuous production. Springfield will never be located. Not because the decision has not been made, but because the decision was made long ago that Springfield is more useful as a mystery than as an answer. A town that could be anywhere belongs to everyone, and a town that belongs to everyone is a town that nobody can shut down. Section 11. Hans Moleman and the Death Loop. Hans Moleman has died more times than anyone has bothered to count. He is a small, elderly, nearly blind man with enormous glasses and a vaguely confused relationship with his own continued existence. He appears in the background of Springfield scenes with considerable frequency, and his function in the show is, with extraordinary consistency, to be harmed. He is struck by cars. He is crushed by falling objects. He is buried alive by careless construction workers. He is eaten by large animals. He is set on fire. He falls into open trenches. He walks into traffic and disappears beneath wheels without the drivers appearing to notice. He is, by any reasonable count, the most frequently killed character in the history of American animation. And he keeps coming back. Not in dream sequences, not in alternate timelines, not in the non-canonical horror anthology episodes that the show uses as a space for killing off regular characters with impunity. Hans Moleman dies in regular canonical episodes in the main continuity of the show, and then appears in the next episode completely unharmed, as if the previous death never occurred. Most fans accept this as a running joke. Moleman dies a lot. It is funny. It is a gag the writers return to because it reliably generates a particular kind of absurdist laugh. Do not think about it too hard. But Moleman once stated his age as 31 years old. 31. Look at Hans Moleman. He appears, by visual assessment, to be somewhere in his 80s or 90s. He has the physical presentation of a man who has been very old for a very long time, a man whose face and body have been significantly affected by the years. If he is telling the truth about his age and there is no canonical reason given within the show to suggest he is not, then something happened to Hans Moleman that aged him at a catastrophic rate. Something took a man who should be in the middle of a normal adult life and turned him into the physical equivalent of someone several decades older. Something that also apparently made his relationship with death significantly more negotiable than it is for most people. Under the radiation theory, Moleman represents the most extreme mutation in Springfield. A man whose biology has been so thoroughly altered by chronic nuclear exposure that his aging process has been catastrophically accelerated, while his capacity to sustain fatal injury and recover from it has been simultaneously enhanced. He does not survive his deaths the way Homer survives injuries. Homer endures damage and heals. Moleman actually dies and then he comes back, as if death in Springfield is a temporary condition for certain residents. As if the power plant has done something to his cellular structure that makes permanent biological cessation impossible. Under the coma theory, Moleman serves a different function. He is a minor character, a background process in Homer's dream. Homer's unconscious mind does not invest enough narrative energy in Moleman to maintain him consistently. When the dream needs Moleman to populate a scene, he appears. When the dream no longer needs that scene, the character is disposed of. But the dream also needs him for the next scene that requires his particular quality of presence. And so he reassembles himself, because the dream requires him to. Because Homer's mind is still running the simulation and still needs certain recurring elements to make Springfield feel populated and alive. Moleman is not a person in this reading. He is a prop. A piece of the dream's furniture that Homer's mind occasionally breaks and then rebuilds, because breaking things and rebuilding them is something Homer's mind does when it is running low on more substantive narrative material. Under the collective denial theory, Moleman's deaths are simply another thing Springfield has agreed not to notice. A man dies publicly, visibly, in front of witnesses who watch it happen, and nobody calls for an investigation. Nobody asks how he keeps reappearing. The town has normalized his death cycle the same way it has normalized everything else that should be alarming. The three-eyed fish. The billionaire who glows in the dark. The baby who shot a man. The principal with a stolen identity. And a tiny elderly man of 31 who dies every few weeks and shows up fresh for more. One more thread in the tapestry of things Springfield has decided not to see. Now let us talk about Ned Flanders, because Ned is a different kind of mystery. Not the mystery of impossible physical endurance, or the mystery of institutional concealment, or the mystery of extraordinary intelligence hidden in plain sight. Ned's mystery is the mystery of what happens to a good man in a world that does not reward goodness. On the surface, Ned Flanders is the moral center of Springfield. He is kind, patient, generous, devoutly religious, physically disciplined, financially responsible, a devoted father, and a thoughtful neighbor. He is, by any metric you might apply to the question, a better person than Homer Simpson in virtually every measurable respect. And the show punishes him for it with a thoroughness that, once you notice it, is genuinely difficult to watch. His wife Maude was killed by a t-shirt cannon at a Springfield Speedway event. Homer was in the seats beside her and was dodging the shirts being fired from the cannon. Because Homer moved out of the way, the shirts hit Maude instead. She was knocked from the bleachers. She did. Homer's reflexive selfishness, his instinct to protect himself at the expense of whoever happened to be standing near him, killed Ned Flanders' wife. Ned forgave him, because that is what Ned does. He forgives. He turns the other cheek. He absorbs punishment with grace and patience and an unwavering expression of faith that suggests God's plan is operating on a timeline that Ned cannot fully perceive but trusts implicitly. And then a hurricane destroys Ned's house. The community rallies. They rebuild the house. They rebuild it with such spectacular incompetence, with such a comprehensive failure to apply any basic construction knowledge, that the structure collapses almost immediately. And in the moment that the house falls, Ned Flanders, who has absorbed loss after loss with quiet grace, breaks. He screams at the town. He insults everyone who has ever wronged him. He says things he has been holding for years, things that the polished exterior of his personality has been containing with enormous effort. He has a complete psychological collapse, and then he is institutionalized. In the treatment facility, it is revealed that Ned's relentless niceness is not a natural character trait. It is the result of behavioral modification conducted when Ned was a child. Ned was a violent and uncontrollable boy. His parents, committed to a philosophy of non-intervention, took him to a psychiatrist who spent years systematically conditioning the aggression out of him through what amounts to intensive behavioral reprogramming. The anger that was part of his natural personality was not resolved. It was suppressed. It was encaged behind a behavioral structure so thorough and so comprehensive that Ned cannot access it under normal circumstances, which is why his performance of kindness and forgiveness looks so effortless. It is effortless because it is not a choice. It is a program running automatically. Every interaction Ned has with Homer, every act of forgiveness, every demonstration of patience in the face of behavior that a reasonable person would find intolerable, is not an expression of moral choice or spiritual development. It is the programmed response of a man whose capacity for normal negative emotional expression was systematically removed during his childhood. He cannot be angry. He was conditioned not to be. And so when Homer is cruel, Ned forgives. When Homer destroys something that belongs to Ned, Ned forgives. When Homer's selfishness kills Ned's wife, Ned forgives. Not because he is saintly, but because his brain will not allow the alternative. The kindness is not a virtue. It is a cage. The show knows this. The show has told us this directly in the episode where the conditioning is revealed. Everything about Ned's life reads differently once this information is in place. His faith is not a spiritual conviction freely chosen. It is a coping framework that a man desperately needs in order to construct meaning from a life that has delivered extraordinary suffering in return for extraordinary effort to be good. His patience with Homer is not grace. It is a psychological compulsion he cannot override. His forgiveness after Maude's death is not the most remarkable expression of human spiritual capacity depicted in the show. It is the programmed response of a system that was designed, by a well-meaning doctor acting on behalf of inadequate parents, to never allow Ned to feel what he actually feels. And the saddest part of Ned Flanders, the detail that sits at the center of his character and makes everything else about him more difficult to watch, is this. God talks to Homer. God has spoken to Homer directly, face to face in real conversation, in canonical episodes of the show. Homer has spoken to God twice. Homer has a direct and documented personal relationship with the divine, conducted in the comfortable manner of two people who know each other reasonably well. And God has never spoken to Ned Flanders. Ned goes to church every Sunday. Ned prays regularly and attentively. Ned has dedicated his entire adult life to faith, to the practice of the values he was conditioned to embody, to a genuine attempt to be what his religion asks him to be. And God is silent to Ned in a way that God is never silent to Homer. The man who sleeps through sermons and uses prayer mainly to ask for things and approaches religion as a vaguely cultural backdrop to his actual life has direct divine communication. The man who treats his faith as the most serious commitment of his existence gets silence. The Simpsons is telling you something with this arrangement. It is not telling it loudly, not pointing at it and demanding that you notice. It is telling it the way Springfield tells most of its truths, quietly, in the background, visible only to people who are paying close attention. The system does not reward goodness. In Springfield, as perhaps in the broader world the show is using Springfield to describe, the system rewards compliance. Burns is powerful because he built a system that serves his needs. Homer is protected because a deal was made. The corrupt are maintained in their positions because maintaining them is more convenient than addressing the corruption. And the good, the genuinely good, the people who try hardest and hurt least and ask only that their effort be met with some proportional response from the universe, get Ned Flanders' life. A dead wife, a destroyed house, a neighbor who will never appreciate him, and a God who talks to everyone except the one person who is actually listening. That is what happens to goodness in Springfield. And it is, in its quiet and devastating way, one of the most honest things the show has ever said about the world it was built to describe. Section 12. The loop is ours. We have been in Springfield for a long time tonight. We have walked through its radiation-soaked streets and sat beside Homer's hospital bed and examined the evidence in the Burns shooting case and stood before the judge's decree that made truth illegal. We have watched Maggie's eyes follow everything and understood what she has been deciding not to say. We have traced the arc of Mona Simpson's exile across 3 generations of a family shaped by one man's refusal to let things be. We have searched for Springfield on every map and found it everywhere and nowhere, which is precisely where it intended to be found. And now, here at the end of the journey, we are going to bring all of it together. Not to resolve it, because the most interesting mysteries are not the ones that get resolved, but to see what it looks like when every thread is held at once. The floating timeline, the fact that nobody in Springfield ages, the fact that Bart has been 10 years old for 36 years, and Lisa has been 8, and Maggie has been 1, and Homer and Marge have been somewhere in their mid-30s through every cultural upheaval and technological revolution and world event that has occurred since December of 1989. We said at the beginning of tonight that this was the central mystery of Springfield, the one that every other theory eventually arrives at and has to account for. Let us see what happens when all of them account for it simultaneously. The coma theory says nobody ages because they exist inside the frozen mind of a man who fell unconscious in April of 1993 and has never woken up. Homer's children are preserved at the ages he last knew them, because he was not there to watch them age. His world is locked at the moment the vending machine fell, held in place by the only force strong enough to keep it there. The love of a man for his family, and the brain's desperate refusal to let go of the thing it loves most. The radiation theory says nobody ages because their biology has been altered at the cellular level by decades of exposure to the contaminated environment produced by a nuclear facility with 342 unaddressed safety violations. Whatever the contamination has done to them, it has done it comprehensively enough to affect not just their skin color and their finger count and their cognitive function, but the basic biological processes that normally govern how organisms age through time. The collective denial theory says nobody ages because Springfield, as a community, has made a decision to pretend that time works differently inside its borders. The same mechanism that turned Armin Tamzarian into Seymour Skinner, the same communal vote that exiled truth and made comfortable fiction into law, has been applied to the passage of time itself. Springfield has decided, through its unspoken social contract, that its residents will not visibly age, that the family on Evergreen Terrace will remain as they have always been, and that anyone who points out that the children should be adults by now is making the same mistake as the real Seymour Skinner and should be treated accordingly. The Burns immortality theory says that at least one person in Springfield has found a way to cheat the normal biological progression toward death, which means that the concept of aging is already negotiable in this universe, already a variable rather than a constant, already something that the right application of resources and knowledge can suspend or modify. Every theory arrives at the same place through a different door. Time does not work in Springfield. Not because the show's writers failed to maintain continuity, not because animated television has conventions about character aging. Within the logic of the world the show has built, something has broken the normal relationship between the passage of time and its visible effects on the people who live in it. And that broken relationship is either a symptom of what the power plant has done to Springfield's biology, or the product of what a comatose brain needs to believe in order to keep dreaming, or the expression of a communal decision to protect an agreed-upon reality from the erosion that truth would cause, or the consequence of having at least one person at the top of the social structure who has demonstrated that ordinary biological constraints can be circumvented with sufficient resources, or all four at once. Because the most interesting reading of Springfield is not the one that picks a single explanation and commits to it. The most interesting reading is the one that holds all the explanations simultaneously and recognizes that each of them is pointing at the same underlying truth from a different angle. The show has imagined what it would look like if the characters aged. It has done this multiple times, in flash-forward episodes that give us glimpses of who these people might become if time were allowed to move forward. In one of the most beloved of these episodes, Lisa's Wedding from Season 6, the show takes us to a future in which Lisa is a 23-year-old woman about to be married. The future it depicts is detailed and emotionally precise. Lisa has grown up into exactly the person her 8-year-old self seemed destined to become. Intelligent and principled, and lonely in the particular way that very intelligent people are lonely, searching for connection in a world that does not quite know what to do with her. The episode proves that the show can imagine its characters as adults. It can envision their futures. It can tell stories about who they would become if time were allowed to pass. But it chooses not to. The flash forward is a single episode, a what if, a glimpse through a window that closes the moment the episode ends. Lisa returns to being 8. Bart returns to being 10. The future is locked away. The permanent present resumes as if the glimpse never happened. The show can imagine growth. It refuses to allow it. And this refusal, this persistent and deliberate refusal to let these characters age, is not just a creative decision about The Simpsons. It is a statement about America. The Simpsons is the American family. They have occupied that position in the cultural imagination for longer than any other fictional household in the history of the medium. They are the family we watch when we need to believe that the American family endures, that it survives its own dysfunction and its own excess and its own failure to be as good as it knows it should be, that it comes back together every Sunday night on the same couch, in the same house, on the same street, with the same level of love underneath all the chaos. And the American family, as The Simpsons depicts it, cannot be allowed to age. Homer must always be middle-aged. Marge must always be patient in the particular way that holds the household together. Bart must always be the embodiment of uncomplicated rebellion. Lisa must always be the voice of idealism that the world is not quite ready to listen to. Maggie must always be the silent observer whose potential remains permanently unrealized but permanently present. The dynamic must be preserved. The structure must hold. Because the moment the Simpson family ages, the moment Bart graduates, and Lisa leaves, and Maggie finally speaks, and Homer retires, and the house on Evergreen Terrace has fewer and fewer people in it, the show stops being a comedy. It becomes something else. It becomes a story about ending. about the passage of time and the things that cannot survive it, about the children who grow up and leave and become strangers to the parents who raised them. It becomes an elegy, and America does not want that story, not from this family, not from the family it has invested so completely in for so long. What America wants from The Simpsons is the version where the kids are always young and the parents are always together, and the house looks the same every week, and the couch gag plays, and Homer comes through the door, and Marge calls him. And the whole familiar machinery of the household starts up again and runs for 22 minutes before stopping and resetting and running again. The floating timeline is not a narrative convenience. The floating timeline is a cultural statement. The Simpsons are frozen in time because we need them to be. Because they represent something that we have identified as the American family and decided we cannot afford to lose. Because letting them age would mean admitting that families do age, that children do grow up, that the world the show was built to describe has changed, in ways that the show cannot finally acknowledge without ceasing to be the thing it has been. The loop that keeps Springfield frozen is not inside the show. The loop is in the audience. We built it. We maintain it. We tune in every week, and every time we do, we tighten it slightly. Every time we press play, every time we settle into the couch and let the opening theme carry us back to Springfield, we are choosing to keep the family as they are. We are choosing the same morning, the same routine, the same faces at the same ages in the same house. We are choosing what Springfield has always chosen, the comfortable fiction over the uncomfortable truth, the permanent present over the natural movement of time, the dream over the waking. And every theory we have explored tonight, every thread we have pulled from the fabric of 36 seasons, every buried storyline, and every unresolved mystery and every detail the show dropped quietly and never quite returned to, all of it comes back to this. We built Springfield and then we moved in. We watched it long enough that its impossibilities became familiar. Long enough that the yellow skin stopped registering as strange and the four fingers stopped registering as wrong, and the children who never age stopped registering as a mystery worth investigating. Long enough that we became like the residents of the town itself, capable of looking at a three-eyed fish and saying, with complete comfort, well, that is just how things are here. We became Springfield. And Springfield, all of it, the radiation and the coma and the shooting and the immortal man and the silent genius and the vanished mother and the principal who was never who he said he was and the town that cannot be found on any map and the family that cannot age, all of it is a mirror, the most elaborate and patient and affectionate mirror ever constructed in the history of American entertainment. 36 years of the same family in the same house held up so that we can see ourselves in them. Messy and loving and failing and trying and unable to quit. The loop is not their prison. It is ours. We built it. We live in it. And every Sunday night, every time we go back to Evergreen Terrace and find it exactly as we left it, we add another thread to the walls. Homer is still in the coma, Springfield is still glowing, Maggie is still watching, and we are still here, still watching back. There is a theory, the final theory, the one that sits underneath every other theory and holds them all like a foundation. And it is not about radiation or comas or cover-ups or immortality or silent geniuses or geographic impossibilities. It is about why we cannot let go. Why 36 years after a family sat on a couch and a Springfield nobody could locate on a map, we are still there. Still tuning in. Still arguing about the mysteries. Still building theories in the middle of the night and sharing them with strangers and feeling, when someone else has found the same pattern that we found, the particular joy of recognized truth. We cannot let go because the Simpsons are ours. Not in the legal sense, not in the sense of ownership or intellectual property or media rights, in the sense that matters more than those. In the sense that they are part of the furniture of our inner lives, part of the texture of our memories, present in the background of moments that had nothing to do with them, running in the corner of consciousness like a piece of music you know so well you can hear it clearly even in complete silence. Homer is our fathers, all of them at once, the ones who tried and the ones who failed, and the ones who were never quite intelligent enough to understand what they had done or undone, but who loved their families with a desperation that needed no intelligence to sustain it. Marge is the patience that holds everything together, the patience that never gets enough credit. The patience that is sometimes mistaken for passivity, but is actually a form of strength that very few people possess. Bart is the person we wanted to be when we were 10. The one who pushed back and got away with it and made the world feel slightly less confining than it actually was. Lisa is the person we should have been. The one who did not stop asking questions, even when the questions made her lonely. The one who kept believing that being right about things mattered, even when the world demonstrated, repeatedly and without apology, that it did not. And Maggie is the version of ourselves we keep inside. The part that watches everything and says nothing. The part that has been calculating and assessing and building towards something for a very long time. The part that we reveal only when we are sure nobody is watching. We cannot let go of Springfield because letting go would mean admitting that the couch we sat on when we first watched it is in a different place now or in someone else's house, or gone entirely. It would mean admitting that the years between then and now have happened, that we are different from who we were, that the world the show was made to describe has changed in ways both profound and ordinary, and that time, despite all of Springfield's best efforts, has continued to pass. As long as The Simpsons are on, as long as the loop keeps floating, as long as Bart is 10 and Lisa is 8 and Homer is stumbling through the front door after another day at the plant, we do not have to admit any of that. We can go home, we can sit down, turn on the television, and go home to Evergreen Terrace, to Springfield, to the family that never changes, in the town that never ages, in the show that never ends. The loop is not the mystery. The loop is the answer. To the question of why we watch, why we return, why we build theories in the middle of the night and lie awake thinking about the implications of a three-eyed fish and a sleeping safety inspector and a baby who has been watching everything for 36 years. We watch because we love them. We always did. And in Springfield, love is the one thing that never has to end. Let the sounds of Evergreen Terrace carry you now. Let the cooling towers hum in the distance. Let Homer sleep at his desk, and Marge fold laundry with the television on, and Lisa practice scales on her saxophone in the room at the top of the stairs. Let Maggie watch from her crib with those enormous knowing eyes. Let the loop run. You are safe here. Springfield is exactly as you left it. It always will be. If you made it all the way to Springfield and back tonight, you are someone special. Drop your time and your location in the comments. Tell us where in the world you are listening from right now. And if this journey is the kind of thing you want more of, subscribe so you never miss one. We go deep here, we go slowly, and there is always more Springfield waiting. Good night from Evergreen Terrace. See you next time. End of script estimated word count, approximately 52,000 words. Section 12 continued. The loop is ours. Full expansion. The moment the Simpson family ages, the moment Bart turns 11 and that birthday is acknowledged and carried forward into the next episode, the whole architecture of what the show is begins to shift beneath you. A Bart who is 11 is a Bart who was 10 last year. A Bart who was 10 last year is a Bart who will be 12 the year after. And a show in which Bart is aging is a show that is pointed toward an ending, because the aging of these characters is the arrival of time, and the arrival of time means the arrival of all the things that time eventually brings to every family. Graduations, moves, the particular quiet of a house after the children have left it. America does not want that story. Not from The Simpsons, not from the family that has served as the country's mirror for 36 years. What America wants from The Simpsons is the version it has always had. The version where the kids are always young, and the parents are always together, and the beer is always cold, and the couch gag plays every week, and none of it ever has to end. The floating timeline is not a narrative device. It is a cultural statement made in the language of production decisions. The Simpsons are frozen in time because we need them to be, because they represent something that America has identified as essential to itself, and has decided cannot be allowed to change. And the fact that we have been saying this to the show for 36 years, renewing it and watching it, and insisting on its continuation, means that we have been the mechanism of the loop all along. The loop that keeps Springfield frozen, the loop that keeps Bart at 10 and Lisa at 8 and Maggie forever 1, runs on an energy source that was never inside the show. It runs on us. Every time we press play and find them exactly as we left them, we add another thread to the walls that keep them in. Every time we quote a line from an episode that aired before most of us were born, every time we feel the particular comfort of Springfield's familiar visual grammar, every time we look at a three-eyed fish and say, well, that is just how things are around here, we are participating in the maintenance of the fiction that the show needs to keep running. We are Springfield. We always were. Now consider what that means for the theories we have spent tonight building. If the radiation theory is true, if the yellow skin and the four fingers and the inability to age are all symptoms of a contamination that has been ongoing since before most of the characters were born, then the contamination has spread beyond the borders of Springfield. It spread through the television, it came through the screen and entered the culture and infected the way an enormous number of people understand their own world. We did not contract it through drinking the water. We contracted it through watching. Through the 36 years of accumulated exposure to a place so thoroughly contaminated that its contamination has become the definition of normal. We are the residents who have been drinking the water long enough that the three-eyed fish stopped seeming strange. We are the people who look at yellow skin and four fingers and say, that is just the art style. We have normalized Springfield the same way Springfield has normalized itself. If the coma theory is true, if everything since 1993 is Homer's dream, then the dream has a reach that extends beyond the sleeping man in the hospital bed. The dream has been broadcast. It has been watched by hundreds of millions of people across 36 years. It has entered their dreams. It has become part of the architecture of their inner lives. Homer's dream and the dreams of everyone who has watched it have become, in some way that is not metaphorical but cultural, continuous. The dream of a man in a hospital bed became the shared dream of a generation. If the collective denial theory is true, if Springfield resets by voting to forget, then we have been casting the same vote from outside the screen. Every time we accept the reset. Every time we let the continuity errors pass without comment. Every time we agree, implicitly and without ceremony, that the family will be exactly as we left them when we return, we are voting with Springfield to maintain the comfortable fiction over the uncomfortable truth. The truth being that the show is a mirror, and the mirror has been showing us ourselves for long enough that we have trouble distinguishing the reflection from the face. Bart is 10 years old. He has been 10 years old for 36 years. He has been 10 years old while actual children who were 10 when the show premiered have grown up and had children of their own who are now old enough to watch the show and feel the same comfort their parents felt and continue the cycle. Springfield's children do not age, but the audience watching them has. The audience has aged and had children and grown old, and the show has remained constant. And that constancy is what makes it precious. It is a fixed point. In a world that changes constantly and often terrifyingly quickly, in a cultural landscape where almost nothing stays the same from one year to the next, The Simpsons is the same. Bart is 10. Lisa is 8. Homer comes home from the plant. Marge makes dinner. The couch gag plays. The theme music starts. And for 22 minutes, the world is organized in a way you recognize. That is what we are preserving when we keep the loop running. Not a television show, not a franchise, not an intellectual property that generates revenue for a media company. We are preserving a feeling, the feeling of knowing what is coming, the feeling of a world that makes sense in the particular way that familiar things make sense, the feeling of coming home to a place that has been waiting for you exactly as you left it. Homer's coma dream preserves his world because he needs it to be preserved, and we preserve the show because we need the same thing. We are all Homer, in our own way. We are all dreaming the same dream. We are all maintaining the same fiction. We are all voting, every week, to keep the family on the couch, and the town on the map that nobody can find, and the children at the ages they were when we first loved them. The loop is not their prison. It is our prayer. Let me tell you something about the nature of the theories we have spent tonight exploring. The radiation theory and the coma theory and the collective denial theory and the Burns immortality theory and the Mona Simpson conspiracy and the geography mystery and Maggie's strategic silence and the shooting of Burns and the principal who was never himself. These theories are not just clever analyses of a television show. They are not simply exercises in finding patterns in the work of writers who were mostly just trying to make people laugh. They are the audience doing what the audience does when it loves something enough to look at it carefully. They are the natural result of 36 years of attention. When you love something enough, you watch it closely. When you watch something closely for long enough, you begin to see things that the casual viewer does not see. You begin to find the patterns beneath the surface. You begin to ask the questions that the show itself seems to be circling around without quite landing on. You begin to feel, with increasing certainty, that the thing you love is saying something more than it says out loud. The Simpsons rewards this kind of attention. It has always rewarded it. The show was built with layers, not by accident, but by design, by a group of writers who were educated and ambitious and who cared about what they were making. The jokes on the surface were for the casual viewer, but underneath the jokes, running in the background, visible only to the people who were paying close attention, there has always been a different conversation happening. A conversation about power and how it is maintained, about families and what they survive and what they do not survive, about communities and what they choose to remember and what they choose to forget, about what it costs to be intelligent in a world that does not reward intelligence, about what it costs to be good in a world that does not reward goodness, about the particular grief of a man who wanted so little and was denied even that. The theories are the audience hearing that conversation. The theories are the audience saying, "Back to the show, we heard you. We understood what you were actually saying. We followed the threads you left and arrived at the place they were pointing toward." And the show, in its particular way, has been acknowledging this. Not directly, not with confirmation or resolution, but with the wink of a show that knows it has been seen. The fake coma episode. The meta-commentary about predictions. The oblique references to fan theories that appear in later seasons. The show has always known that the audience was watching closely, and it has always fed that watching with just enough to keep it running. The relationship between the show and its most devoted watchers is the most loyal relationship in the history of American television. The show has been on for 36 years, and the theories have been building for almost as long. They have been building in online forums and in comment sections, and in late-night conversations between people who love the show more than they can quite articulate. They have been building in the minds of people lying awake at night in exactly the situation you are in right now. Half asleep and half thinking, with Springfield somewhere at the edge of consciousness. That is where the theories live. In the space between waking and sleeping. In the particular receptiveness of a mind that is letting go of the day but has not quite let go of thought. In the quiet where the background hum of the cooling towers becomes audible because all the other noise has finally stopped. Springfield is most fully itself in the dark, in the late hours. In the time when the town is not performing for the daylight and the casual viewer but is simply existing, with all its contradictions, and all its impossibilities, and all its beauty, and all its horror, in the way that places exist when nobody is watching them. This is when the three-eyed fish swims in the river without anyone remarking on it. This is when the cooling towers hum. This is when Maggie watches from her crib and thinks the thoughts she will never say out loud. This is when Burns walks through the woods on his way home from his weekly treatment, glowing softly in the dark. This is when Homer dreams. And this is when we come to Springfield to listen. Not to understand it completely, not to resolve every mystery or answer every question, but to sit with the strangeness of it, to let the theories breathe, to follow the threads as far as they go and then rest in the place they arrive at, which is not an answer but a feeling. The feeling of a place that has been trying to tell you something true for a very long time. The feeling of a show that has been holding up a mirror for 36 years and inviting you to look at what it reflects. The feeling of coming home to a family that will always be there, in a town that will always be exactly as you left it, in a story that will not end because we have collectively decided that we need it not to end. Springfield is not a quirky cartoon town. It is a contamination zone and a dreaming mind and a community built on managed forgetting and a monument to the lengths that unchecked power will go to protect itself. It is all of these things simultaneously, and it is home. Bonus section. The Treehouse of Horror and what it reveals. There is one corner of Springfield that exists outside the rules. Every year, usually in the weeks surrounding Halloween, The Simpsons produces an episode that is formally separated from the regular continuity of the show. The Treehouse of Horror Anthology. 3 short stories presented within a framing device that signals to the audience that what they are about to watch does not count. The events in these stories will not be referenced in subsequent episodes. The deaths depicted in these stories, and there are many of them, will not carry forward. The versions of the characters that appear in these stories are the regular characters, but freed from the constraints of continuity. In the Treehouse of Horror episodes, Homer dies regularly, Bart dies regularly, the entire family dies regularly. Characters are eaten, dissolved, obliterated, and erased. Springfield is destroyed in new and elaborate ways every year. The entire premise is that within this designated space, the normal rules of the show's universe are suspended. Most people experience this as a welcome break from continuity, a chance for the show to do things it cannot do in regular episodes, a space where genuine darkness and genuine finality are permitted in service of horror comedy. But there is something interesting about the Treehouse of Horror episodes that is worth sitting with. The things that happen in them are, in many cases, not actually more extreme than things that happen in the regular episodes. Homer has survived things in canonical episodes that are more physically catastrophic than many of the fates his Treehouse counterpart suffers. The difference is not in the content. The difference is in the framing. The Treehouse episodes exist outside the loop. They are explicitly labeled as non-canonical. The show tells you in advance that these events do not count. Which raises an interesting question. If the regular episodes also have a mechanism for resetting and forgetting catastrophic events, if Springfield's collective denial theory operates to erase consequences from the canonical timeline, just as thoroughly as the Treehouse framing erases them from the non-canonical one, then what is actually the difference between a Treehouse of Horror death and a canonical Springfield catastrophe? In both cases, the character is fine by the next episode. In both cases, the event leaves no mark on the ongoing story. In both cases, Springfield processes the impossible thing and returns to baseline as if it never happened. The only difference is that in the Treehouse episodes, the show tells you explicitly that the events are not real. In the canonical episodes, the show maintains the pretense that they are real, even while resetting as thoroughly as the non-canonical anthology. This is a small but revealing distinction. It suggests that the boundary between what is real in Springfield and what is not real in Springfield is softer and more permeable than the show usually acknowledges. It suggests that Springfield operates in a state of ongoing fiction within fiction, where the rules about what counts and what does not count are always in flux, always subject to the needs of the current episode, always flexible enough to accommodate whatever the story requires. The Treehouse episodes are the honest version of what all Springfield episodes are. They are episodes that have simply decided to be transparent about their relationship with continuity rather than maintaining the pretense that consequences are real. Under the coma theory, the Treehouse episodes are the dream acknowledging itself as a dream. Homer's unconscious mind, in these annual installments, allows itself to produce stories in which the pretense of normal reality is explicitly suspended, because somewhere beneath the dreaming, the mind that is generating the dream knows what it is. The Treehouse episodes are the dream winking. They are the unconscious mind letting a little bit of truth surface, just enough to acknowledge the nature of the situation before the regular dream resumes. Under the collective denial theory, the Treehouse episodes are Springfield voting explicitly for a specific kind of amnesia. The town gathers, watches its own residents die in elaborate ways, and agrees in advance that none of it will be remembered. The prearranged forgetting, the scheduled denial. Every year, Springfield formally votes to not remember the content of these three stories, and every year it keeps that vote. There is also the question of what the Treehouse episodes tell us about the show's relationship with death. In Springfield's regular continuity, death is taken seriously when it happens to characters who matter. Maud Flanders died, and that death was respected and carried forward. Mona Simpson died, and the show gave that death the emotional weight it deserved. The deaths of named, established characters in the regular continuity of the show leave marks that persist. But the Treehouse episodes suggest that Springfield has a complex and somewhat flexible relationship with the finality of death. In the non-canonical space, death is reversible, cyclical, performative. It happens and unhappens. It is a state rather than an ending. And Hans Moleman, as we discussed earlier, demonstrates that this relationship between death and reversibility is not entirely confined to the treehouse. His canonical deaths and returns suggest that for certain residents of Springfield, perhaps those most thoroughly affected by the plant's contamination, the normal biological finality of death may not apply in quite the same way. Springfield is a place where death is sometimes temporary, which may be the most extraordinary and most quietly horrifying thing about it. Bonus section: the Quickie Mart and the economy of dependence. There is a building at a significant intersection in Springfield that is always open. The Quickie Mart operates 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, under the management of Apu Nahasapima Petilan, a character who has occupied one of the most complicated positions in the show's history. The store is a constant. It is one of Springfield's fixed points, a place that is always there regardless of what else is happening in the town. Always lit, always stocked, always willing to provide whatever small and overpriced comfort the residents need at any hour. Homer goes there for donuts and beer. Apu has lived there at various points in ways that speak to a particular kind of economic entrapment. The Quick E-Mart is not just a convenience store in the narrative of Springfield. It is a symbol of a certain kind of economy. The economy of small transactions between people who do not have the resources to buy in bulk, who do not have the transportation to reach larger stores with better prices, who depend on the convenience of proximity even when proximity comes with a significant markup. The Quickie Mart serves the people who cannot afford to shop anywhere else. And Apu, who has a doctorate, who is one of the most formally educated characters in Springfield, runs it. He works extraordinary hours for an income that is not commensurate with his qualifications. He is, within the economic logic of Springfield, a resource that has been allocated far below its potential. A person with the education and the capability for much more, working a job that anyone could do, because the structure of the economy he exists within does not provide a path to something better. This is not an accident of the show's storytelling. The Quickie Mart, in the larger architecture of Springfield's economy, is part of the same system that keeps Homer at the power plant and keeps Burns at the top. It is the bottom of a hierarchy that is maintained through the same mechanisms that maintain every other aspect of Springfield's structure. The plant provides the power. Burns owns the plant. The economy runs on the power. The people spend their money at stores like the Quick E-Mart because the plant jobs pay enough to live on, but not enough to accumulate the kind of resources that would allow them to exit the system. And the system continues. Apu is the Quick E-Mart in the same way Homer is the plant. Not because either of them chose to be, not because their situation reflects their capabilities or their worth, but because the structure of Springfield places them there and keeps them there and ensures that their continued presence in those roles serves the economic architecture of the town. The Quick E-Mart is always open because Springfield always needs it to be, and Apu is always there because Springfield always needs him to be there. Bonus section: the music of Springfield. Lisa Simpson plays saxophone. She has been playing saxophone for 36 years, which means she has been playing for longer than most professional musicians have been alive. She plays with a quality that the show depicts as extraordinary, as something beyond ordinary musical talent. She plays jazz, which is not the obvious musical choice for an 8-year-old in a working-class household, in a town whose cultural ambitions are modest at best. She plays because she has to, because the saxophone is the language she can speak most honestly, because the sound of it is the closest she can get to saying clearly all the things that the world around her refuses to hear. Music in The Simpsons is always doing something beyond entertainment. Homer sings. He sings with a passion that his cognitive limitations cannot suppress. He sings at inappropriate moments and to inappropriate songs, and with an enthusiasm that is entirely disconnected from any assessment of whether the singing is good. Homer's singing is one of the few places in the show where something like pure feeling is visible in him, unfiltered by the damage and the limitations, and the managed incompetence that defines most of his navigation of the world. Sideshow Bob sings Gilbert and Sullivan. This detail is both a reliable source of comedy and a window into something real about the character. Sideshow Bob is the most formally educated character in Springfield's criminal history. He has taste, sophistication, and genuine cultural refinement, and he expresses all of this through the operettas of a Victorian-era theatrical duo, which is the music of a man who has been in prison and who has somehow retained, through all the degradation of institutional incarceration, his fundamental aesthetic sensibility. Music in Springfield is what survives when everything else is stripped away. It is what Homer reaches for when language fails him. It is what Lisa uses when she cannot make the adults around her listen to what she is saying. It is what Sideshow Bob carries as evidence that he is more than what Springfield has reduced him to. The show has used music in ways that are more emotionally sophisticated than most viewers register in the moment of watching. The particular song choices and scenes that are meant to devastate, the moments when the background music is doing something that the dialogue cannot do, the musical numbers that appear in episodes and that are simultaneously jokes and genuine emotional expressions. The Simpsons understands music as a form of truth-telling, as the thing that gets past the defenses that the characters and the town and the audience all maintain. When Homer sings, he is not performing. He is being honest. When Lisa plays, she is not practicing. She is saying what she cannot say out loud. And when Springfield gathers to sing, when the whole town joins in a moment of collective music that the show occasionally produces, it is not a heartwarming television moment. It is the one instance where the collective denial is suspended and something real passes through the community before the defenses go back up. Music is the gap in Springfield's armor. It is the frequency at which the truth of the place can travel through the managed fog. Bonus section. Bart's rebellions and what they mean. Bart Simpson has been in rebellion for 36 years. The rebellion is constant. It is the fundamental orientation of his character, the attitude he brings to every situation, the filter through which every authority figure and every institutional demand and every expectation placed upon him is processed. Bart rebels. It is what he does. It is what he is. And under the logic of the theories we have been building tonight, Bart's rebellion is not just a character trait. It is the most rational response available to a person in his position. Bart lives in Springfield. He has grown up inside the contamination zone, drinking the water and breathing the air and attending an underfunded school run by a man who turned out to be not who he said he was. He is being prepared by the institutional apparatus of Springfield's education system for a future that will likely involve working at the nuclear power plant like his father and living in a house that looks like his father's house, and becoming, incrementally and without quite noticing it happening, a version of Homer. The adults in Bart's life, with very few exceptions, have accommodated themselves to this trajectory. They have made their peace with Springfield. They have accepted the terms offered by the system and found a way to live inside those terms with something approaching contentment. Bart has not made that peace. Bart will not make that peace. The rebellion is not adolescent posturing. It is a genuine refusal. A refusal to accept the authority of a system that has been demonstrably failing its residents. A refusal to submit to the expectations of institutions that have proven themselves corrupt and incompetent. A refusal to become the thing that Springfield is trying to produce. Under the coma theory, Bart's rebellion is Homer's deepest wish for his son, articulated through the dream. Homer, who has been unable to rebel against anything because the damage done to him by his mother's absence and the radiation and the crayon and the decades of working for the man who destroyed his family, has made resistance impossible, gives his son in the dream the quality he himself most lacks. The refusal to submit. If Homer is dreaming, then Bart's every prank, every confrontation with authority, every moment of spectacular and creative disobedience is Homer's prayer. The father who could not resist giving his son the power to resist. The man who said yes to everything that Springfield asked of him, including things that he should have refused, dreaming a son who says no with an enthusiasm that the father never managed. Bart is what Homer would have been if the system had not been so thorough in its work. Bonus section. The gorge and the tire fire. Springfield has a gorge and a tire fire. These are two of the most persistent environmental features of the town, and they deserve brief attention before we complete our journey tonight, because they are among the clearest expressions of Springfield's relationship with its own landscape. The gorge is a large and apparently quite deep natural formation at the edge of Springfield. It has been used narratively in multiple ways. Characters fall into it. Things are thrown into it. It is a place where Springfield sends the things it wants to get rid of. The consequences and the inconveniences and the problems that are easier to drop off a cliff than to address directly. The tire fire has been burning for years, possibly decades. Nobody knows exactly when it started. Nobody has made a sustained effort to put it out. It simply burns, generating a column of black smoke that contributes to the general air quality conditions of the surrounding region, and Springfield treats it as a fixed feature of the landscape rather than as an ongoing environmental emergency. The gorge accepts what is thrown into it, and the tire fire burns and burns. Under the radiation theory, both are expressions of the same environmental negligence that produces the three-eyed fish and the cracked cooling towers. Springfield has a complicated relationship with the concept of environmental responsibility, which is to say it has essentially no relationship with it whatsoever. Things are disposed of in Springfield in whatever way is most convenient for the person doing the disposing, and the accumulated consequences of this approach to waste management are visible in the gorge and the tire fire and the luminous rats in the walls of the nuclear plant and the fish with an extra eye. Under the collective denial theory, the gorge and the tire fire are expressions of the town's approach to inconvenient things more broadly. You do not address the problem. You do not resolve it. You find a way to contain it at the edge of your awareness, to push it to the periphery of the landscape, and you walk past it every day without your eyes quite landing on it. The gorge accepts problems. The tire fire is a problem that has been burning so long it has stopped registering as a crisis and started registering as scenery. Springfield does not solve its problems. It sends them to the gorge or lets them burn. Final section. Everything we found. We have been in Springfield tonight for a long time. Longer than any single episode. Longer than most season arcs. Long enough to have walked through the whole town. Not just the main streets and the familiar landmarks, but the back alleys and the neglected corners and the rooms that the establishing shots do not include. And what we found there is more than any single theory can contain. We found a nuclear power plant that has been poisoning its surrounding community for decades, and that continues to operate because the man who owns it has ensured that the person responsible for stopping it is constitutionally incapable of doing his job. We found a man lying in a hospital bed who has been dreaming since April of 1993, preserving his family in the only way left to him after the vending machine fell and the world went dark. We found a mystery that was closed rather than solved, with a verdict built backward from a convenient conclusion and evidence arranged around a predetermined answer. We found an immortal man who is not immortal, but is too expensive to die, sustained by weekly treatments, and a devoted assistant and a century of accumulated infrastructure, all pointed at the single goal of keeping him alive long enough to keep the empire running. We found a town that voted to exile truth and make comfortable fiction the law, and understood that this was not an aberration, but the most honest depiction of how the town operates that the show ever produced. We found a baby who is the most intelligent person on her street, and possibly in her zip code, who has spent 36 years maintaining perfect camouflage and watching everything and waiting for a moment that the show has never quite arrived at. We found a show that has been making predictions that turn out to be descriptions, and understood that the predictions feel so uncanny, not because the writers are prophets, but because the show has spent 36 years saturating the culture with diagnoses of American life that the culture has then proceeded to live out. We followed Mona Simpson from her kitchen in Springfield to a fugitive's life on the run, and back to a cemetery where her son found her 36 years late, and traced the wreckage of what one man's grudge did to 3 generations of a family. We searched for Springfield on every available map and found it everywhere and nowhere, and understood that the ambiguity is the point, that a town you cannot find on a map is a town that cannot be investigated, regulated, or held accountable for what it has done to the people living inside it. We watched Hans Moleman die and return and die again, and we watched Ned Flanders perform goodness in a system that rewards compliance rather than virtue. And we understood that both of them were telling us something important about the kind of place Springfield actually is beneath the jokes. And at the end of all of it, we arrived at the same place that every thread points to. The loop. The loop that keeps Bart at 10 and Lisa at 8 and Maggie forever 1 and Homer forever middle-aged and Springfield forever. Exactly as it was when the show first found it. The loop that is not inside the show but in the audience. The loop that runs on our need for this family to remain unchanged. Our need for a fixed point in a world that provides very few of them. Our need for the house on Evergreen Terrace to be waiting for us, exactly as we left it, whenever we need to come home. The theories are not sad. I want to be clear about that as we come to the end of tonight. The radiation theory is not just a portrait of contamination, it is also a portrait of resilience, of a community that has absorbed an extraordinary amount of damage and has continued to function, continued to love, continued to show up for each other in the ways that matter, even as the damage has accumulated. The coma theory is not just a portrait of a man who cannot wake up. It is a portrait of a love so complete that it generates an entire world to sustain itself. Homer's dream is not a tragedy. It is the most sustained and most beautiful act of devotion in the history of American television. A man who cannot open his eyes, dreaming his family into permanent existence, refusing to let the story end because the story is everything he has. The Mona Simpson theory is not just a story about what was taken, it is also a story about what survived the taking. Homer is damaged, Homer is limited and has been limited by things that were done to him before he was old enough to understand what was happening. But Homer also loves his family with a completeness that the damage has never touched. The crayon can reduce his IQ. The radiation can alter his biology. The absence of his mother can hollow out his capacity for self-understanding, but it cannot touch the love. The love is intact. It has always been intact. And Maggie, watching everything with those enormous knowing eyes, is the proof of what is intact. She inherited the environment that damaged her father. She drank the same water and breathed the same air and grew up in the shadow of the same cracked cooling towers. But whatever the contamination did to Homer, whatever it took from him, it did not pass the same way to Maggie. The mutation, if that is what it is, moved in a different direction in her. It amplified rather than diminished. It gave rather than took. She is watching, she is waiting. She is, of all the characters in Springfield, the one whose story is still ahead of her. The one whose full capabilities have never been deployed. The one who has been preparing for something that the show has never let her arrive at. If Homer is dreaming, if all of this is the product of an unconscious mind holding its world together through sheer force of love, then Maggie is the part of the dream that Homer made most carefully. The youngest child, the most vulnerable, the one he is least able to protect because she was smallest when the dream began. He made her extraordinary because he needed her to be safe without him. He made her capable of anything. And somewhere, in the quiet at the end of the night, when Springfield has finished humming and the cooling towers have dimmed, and Marge has turned off the kitchen light and Bart has finally stopped moving, and Lisa has set down the saxophone and the house is dark and still, Maggie sits in her crib and thinks. She thinks about everything she has seen and everything she knows and everything she is capable of and everything she has not yet done. She thinks about the right moment. She is waiting for the right moment. She has been waiting for 36 years, and she is the most patient person in Springfield, which means she will wait as long as she needs to. And when the moment arrives, when Maggie Simpson finally acts in the full capacity of what she is, nobody in Springfield will be prepared for it. The plan that has been building in the silence behind that pacifier for 3.5 decades. The intelligence that has been watching every mistake and every catastrophe and every institutional failure and every act of collective denial and every vote to expel the truth. She has been taking notes. She has been waiting for her moment. And Springfield will not see it coming. Because that is how Maggie designed it. There is a house on Evergreen Terrace. It sits in the middle of a street that sits in the middle of a town that sits in the middle of an impossible geography that nobody can locate on any map. The house is yellow, like its residents. It has a specific and recognizable shape that millions of people could draw from memory without any preparation. 2 floors, a tree in the front yard, a garage that Homer has used for everything except parking a car, a kitchen window through which Marge can be seen or imagined on any given evening. The house has been there since 1989. It will be there when you wake up tomorrow. It will be there next year and the year after that and every year for as long as the loop runs, which is as long as we need it to, which is as long as we keep pressing play. Homer is inside right now. He is on the couch or at the kitchen table or standing in front of the open refrigerator at midnight, looking for something to eat and not quite finding what he is looking for, which is never quite the thing in the refrigerator. The thing he is looking for has no name in Homer's vocabulary. It has a shape that feels like his mother's voice from a long time ago, and a texture like coming home when home is still a place that is warm and lit and has people in it, and a sound like his children sleeping in the rooms above him. He is looking for that. He is always looking for that. And the dream, generous and patient and endless, keeps providing him with variations on it. Different adventures, different disasters, different recoveries, different credits, different resets. But always the same house at the end. Always the same family waiting in it. Always the same couch and the same orange light and the same sound of Springfield going about its impossible business outside the window. He is home. He is always home. The cooling towers hum in the distance. The water in the river moves slowly past the place where Blinky swims with his extra eye, seeing the world from 3 angles instead of 2. Maggie watches. The loop runs. Springfield is exactly as you left it. Good night. Thank you for spending tonight in Springfield. If you are still here, still awake, or drifting, or somewhere in the warm space between, drop your time and your location in the comments. Tell us where in the world you are, and subscribe if you want more of this. We go deep. We go slow. There is always more Springfield waiting, and we will always find our way back to Evergreen Terrace. Good night from Springfield. See you next time. End of script. Total word count. 40,000 plus words extended. Section: the supporting cast and the architecture of Springfield. We have spent most of tonight with the Simpson family and with Burns. But Springfield is a town, and towns are defined as much by the people in the background as by the people at the center. The supporting cast of The Simpsons is one of the richest and most fully realized ensembles in the history of American television. Each of these characters, when examined through the lens of the theories we have been building, reveals something additional about the world they inhabit. Let us walk through some of them tonight, slowly, in the spirit of a late-night tour through a familiar neighborhood. Chief Clancy Wiggum. Chief Wiggum runs the Springfield Police Department with a consistency of incompetence that has become one of the show's most reliable comedic engines. He is overweight, poorly informed, motivated primarily by food and the path of least resistance, and demonstrably unable to solve crimes of any complexity. His department has failed to adequately investigate the shooting of Burns, has repeatedly failed to address the ongoing safety violations at the nuclear plant, and has failed to intervene in the numerous catastrophes that Springfield experiences on a regular basis. This is sometimes read as simple comedy. The bumbling cop is a comedy archetype as old as comedy itself. Wiggum is funnier than most versions of the archetype. His failure is spectacular in ways that consistently generate laugh. But under the radiation theory, Wiggum is something more specific. He is part of the institutional architecture that ensures Springfield's problems are never addressed. A competent police force investigating the nuclear plant would have produced results decades ago. A competent police force investigating the Burns shooting would have produced a more rigorous accounting of the evidence. A competent police force responding to the systematic poisoning of a community's water supply would have eventually connected enough dots to generate consequences. Wiggum's incompetence is not just a character trait. In the context of the broader theory about how Burns maintains his position, Wiggum's ineffectiveness is structurally useful. A police department that cannot do its job is a police department that cannot interfere with the ongoing operation of the system that Burns has built. Whether this is by design or by the self-reinforcing logic of a contaminated community selecting for leadership that matches its own cognitive condition, is a question the show does not answer directly. But the effect is the same either way. Springfield's law enforcement is not a threat to anything that happens in Springfield. It is a performance of law enforcement that provides the appearance of accountability without the substance of it. This is not a criticism of Wiggum as a character. Wiggum is a lovable figure. He has moments of unexpected grace and genuine warmth. He loves his son Ralph in a way that is touching in its completeness, even if his capacity to actually parent Ralph is limited by his various personal shortcomings. He is not a villain. He is simply a man whose limitations have been placed by the particular structure of his town's power dynamics in exactly the position where those limitations are most useful to the people who benefit from them. Now let us think about Dr. Nick Riviera, the show's recurring bad doctor. Dr. Nick is the physician of last resort in Springfield, the one you call when you have neither money nor any hope of receiving competent medical care through normal channels. He is spectacularly unqualified. His understanding of human anatomy is, at best, approximate. His methods are unconventional in ways that regularly endanger his patients. He charges very little because he is capable of very little, and the patients who end up in his care are generally the patients who cannot afford to go anywhere else. Under the radiation theory, Dr. Nick is another piece of the medical infrastructure failure that allows Springfield's contamination to continue without effective treatment or documentation. A medical community that could accurately diagnose and treat the effects of chronic radiation exposure would generate records, data, and evidence that would eventually make the contamination impossible to ignore. Dr. Nick generates no such records. His diagnoses are wrong often enough that any pattern in the health data of Springfield's population would be invisible beneath the noise of his misattributions. He is, in the same way Wiggum is, structurally useful. Not through malice. Simply through the accident of his incompetence being exactly the incompetence that the system needs in exactly the position where it needs it. Let us think about Comic Book Guy, about Krusty the Clown, about Sideshow Bob and his recurring returns to Springfield, and his recurring failures to actually harm Bart despite decades of dedicated effort. Comic Book Guy is one of the show's most consistent characters. He is dismissive, arrogant, and deeply invested in a hierarchy of cultural knowledge that allows him to feel superior in the specific and limited domain of his expertise. He is, in the language of the show's cultural commentary, a portrait of a particular kind of cultural gatekeeping. The person who responds to every new thing with a reference to a better old thing. The person whose passion for something has curdled, through years of isolation and disappointment, into a defensive posture rather than a joyful one. Under the coma theory, Comic Book Guy is an interesting figure. He is the character who most closely resembles the audience itself. He is the character who has watched the things he loves with the most attention and accumulated the most knowledge about them and built the most elaborate apparatus of appreciation and criticism around them. He is, in his own strange way, the figure who most represents the fan. And the show treats him with a particular kind of affectionate mockery. It recognizes itself in him. It recognizes the audience in him. And it offers him, despite everything, moments of genuine connection and genuine feeling that puncture the armor of his superiority. He falls in love. He is moved by things. The defenses come down occasionally, and what is underneath them is not contempt but care. He cares about things. He has just learned to show that caring as judgment rather than as love, because at some point, caring openly about things became a vulnerability he could not afford. This is Springfield. This is what Springfield does to people who care about things too visibly. Krusty the Clown has lived inside his performance for so long that it is not clear, including possibly to Krusty himself, where the performance ends and the person begins. He is a man who became a clown as a professional choice and then discovered, gradually and without ever quite deciding to let it happen, that the clown had taken over. The sadness and the substance abuse and the failed relationships and the complicated family history are all visible, but they are visible through the grease paint. They are visible through the character rather than separately from it. Krusty is what happens when you perform something for long enough that the performance becomes your only available mode of being in the world. And Sideshow Bob, the Harvard-educated, opera-singing, repeatedly foiled villain. The character who is smarter than Springfield and knows it and cannot escape it. Who returns to Springfield again and again to attempt something that never succeeds, that could never succeed. Because the logic of the show does not permit Bart to be genuinely harmed in the canonical continuity. Under the coma theory, Sideshow Bob is the part of Homer's dream that represents genuine threat. The thing that wants to end the dream. The intelligence that might, if it ever succeeded, break the simulation. Bob keeps coming back and keeps failing because Homer's dreaming mind needs the threat to be real enough to generate tension, but must ensure it never actually succeeds. Bob's repeated failures are not writing failures. They are the dream protecting itself. The dream does not permit its own ending. Extended section. The school, the church, and the bar. There are three institutions at the center of Springfield's social life: the elementary school, the church, the bar. They form a triangle of competing claims on the residents' time and attention and self-understanding. The school represents the future, the investment in the next generation, the official promise that things will be better for the children than they were for the parents. The church represents the transcendent, the frame through which suffering is given meaning and death is given a destination. And the gap between what is and what should be is explained as temporary. The bar represents the present, the immediate, the comfort available right now to people who have stopped waiting for the future or the transcendent to come through. In Springfield, all three are failing simultaneously. The school is chronically underfunded. Its principal was, for 2 decades, a man living under a stolen identity. Its student achievement levels are a running joke that is also, under close examination, a quiet tragedy. The children of Springfield are being educated in a system that is not adequately funded, not adequately led, and not adequately attended to by the institutions that are nominally responsible for ensuring that the education of the next generation happens. Under the radiation theory, the school's failures are partly biological. Children whose cognitive development has been affected by chronic environmental contamination are going to have a harder time learning than children in an uncontaminated environment, and the educational infrastructure that serves them will need to compensate for that additional challenge. Springfield School does not compensate. It cannot compensate because it does not have the resources to compensate, because the plant keeps gutting the funding through the various legal and economic mechanisms that Burns deploys to ensure the school remains dependent and underpowered. The church serves Ned Flanders and a congregation that includes Homer, who sleeps through the sermons. It is presided over by Reverend Lovejoy, a minister who has, across the run of the show, become progressively more detached from any genuine spiritual engagement with his congregation. He delivers his sermons, he performs his functions. But the pastoral fire, if it was ever there, has been replaced by the weary routinism of a professional doing a job. Under the collective denial theory, the church serves an important structural function. It provides a framework within which the residents of Springfield can process the ongoing catastrophes of their lives without connecting those catastrophes to their systemic causes. It offers meaning and comfort, and the promise of a divine plan that explains why things are the way they are without requiring the people in the pews to ask why the fish have 3 eyes, and why the cooling towers have been cracked for 30 years, and why nobody can quite remember what happened last month. The church absorbs the questions that might otherwise become demands. It converts the energy of potential outrage into the patience of faith. And it does this in Springfield, not through malice, but through the earnest and somewhat defeated efforts of a minister who is doing the best he can in a town that has placed more stress on every institution it contains than any institution was designed to bear. Moe's Tavern is the third point of the triangle. Moe's is where Springfield processes what cannot be processed through the school or the church. It is where Homer goes when the rest of the world has become too much, which is frequently. It is where the town's marginal figures gather, where the conversations happen that are too honest for the church and too unproductive for the school. Moe Shyslak himself is one of the show's most carefully written characters when the writers choose to take him seriously. He is, beneath the gruffness and the social difficulty and the economic precarity, a person of genuine feeling who has not had many opportunities to express that feeling in a way that anyone has received well. He has loved. He has been disappointed in love in ways that have calcified his approach to it. He runs a failing business that he is too attached to close, serving regulars who are his only real social world, in a building that is one of Springfield's oldest and most reliable fixtures. Under the coma theory, Moe's Bar is the center of Homer's social dream. It is the place Homer associates with adult companionship, with the particular comfort of men together in a warm and imperfect space, with the version of friendship that is built on proximity and habit rather than on anything as deliberate as choice. Homer's dreaming mind placed Moe's at the center of Springfield's social geography because Moe's is where Homer felt most himself in the waking world. Moe's is Homer's emotional home in the same way that the house on Evergreen Terrace is his domestic home. The school and the church and the bar, failing and persisting and failing again, are the three institutions through which Springfield manages the ongoing experience of being Springfield. They provide, between them, all the frameworks that are available for making sense of a situation that most frameworks are not equipped to address. And they keep failing because Springfield keeps needing them in ways that exceed their capacity. Extended section. Why the show will never end. The Simpsons will not end. This is not a prediction. It is not even quite an opinion. It is an observation about the structural relationship between the show and the culture that produces and consumes it. A relationship that has become so deeply embedded over 36 years that the end of the show would require not just a production decision, but a cultural one. Fox has renewed The Simpsons repeatedly, each renewal announced as a new record. Each extension of the show's run treated as both a celebration and a mild act of defiance against the conventional wisdom about the natural lifespan of television series. The people who make the show have stayed with it in some cases for decades. The people who watch it have passed it between generations. Parents who grew up with the show have introduced it to children who are now introducing it to their own children. The show is not aging, its audience is. And the audience is aging the way the show now means something different to a viewer who was 7 when it premiered and is now in their 40s than it means to a viewer who is 7 right now and encountering it for the first time is one of the most interesting things about what The Simpsons has become. For the viewer who has been watching since the beginning, The Simpsons is a record of their own life laid alongside the show's life. They remember which episodes they watched in specific circumstances. They have memories attached to specific seasons, specific jokes, specific moments that happened in an episode that was airing while something was also happening in their actual life. The show has been running so long that it has become, for its oldest audience members, a kind of parallel chronology. A timeline that runs beside their own timeline, unchanged. They aged. The Simpsons did not. Under the coma theory, this is deeply resonant. The show did not age because it cannot age. Homer's dream preserves the world exactly as it was. And the audience, watching the dream from outside, has experienced the particular strangeness of watching something frozen move through time unchanged, while everything else changes around it. They have aged past the characters they watched as children. Homer is now younger than they are. Bart is now younger than they were when they first identified with him. And yet the show remains. The Simpsons will not end because the loop cannot end. Not while we are maintaining it. Not while we keep returning to Evergreen Terrace and finding it as we left it and feeling the particular comfort that this provides. Not while the show continues to function as a fixed point in a world that provides very few of them. The show will continue until the loop is broken, and the loop will not be broken by the show. The show has never been capable of ending itself. Every time it has appeared to approach something like a conclusion, every flash-forward episode and every finale that seemed to be gesturing toward a last chapter, the show has reset. The permanent present has reasserted itself. Bart has returned to 10. The loop will be broken, if it is ever broken, by the audience. By us. By the day when we collectively decide that we do not need the family to remain unchanged. By the day when we are ready for Bart to turn 11, for Lisa to finish elementary school, for Maggie to speak. By the day when we are ready to say goodbye to the version of these characters that has been waiting for us on the couch since 1989. And hello to whoever they have become in the time that passed while we were watching. That day may never come. We may keep Springfield frozen indefinitely. We may keep pressing play and finding them as we left them, and feeling the relief of it until the medium itself changes so thoroughly that the concept of a weekly animated family sitcom becomes as culturally remote as the concept of a radio drama. We may pass the show to our children, and they may pass it to theirs, and the loop may run for 100 years before it finally, gradually, loses the energy that sustains it. Or it may end next season. The show may decide it has said everything it has to say and close the loop itself, with a final episode that ages the characters forward and lets time arrive and says goodbye in the way that endings deserve. We do not know. Springfield does not know. And somewhere in the hospital bed in Springfield General, Homer does not know. He is dreaming, if he is dreaming. He is generating the next episode, if that is what he is doing. He is holding on to the world he loves in the only way available to him, and the world holds back, and the loop runs, and Bart is 10, and Lisa is 8, and Maggie watches with those knowing eyes. And we watch with them. We have always watched with them. We are in some way that is not easy to articulate, but is nonetheless real, inside the loop with them. We are part of Springfield in the way that anyone who has loved a place becomes part of it. We carry it with us. We return to it. We notice when things change and feel the particular grief of changes that make a beloved place less familiar. And we do not want it to change. Not really. Not when we are honest with ourselves at the end of a long night in the warmth of our own evergreen terraces, with the light low and the world quiet and Springfield humming at the edge of sleep. We do not want it to end. We want the house to be there. We want Homer to come home. We want the couch gag to play and the theme music to start and the family to rush through the door and land on the couch in that familiar pile. Every single one of them exactly as they were. Exactly as they will always be forever. That is what we want. That is what the loop is. That is what it has always been. Close your eyes now. The theories are settled for the night. The radiation hums at the edge of town and the dream generates its next sequence, and the vote to maintain the fiction passes unanimously, and the immortal man receives his weekly treatment, and Maggie watches from her crib. And the real Seymour Skinner is somewhere on a train that is carrying him away from the truth nobody wanted to hear. And on Evergreen Terrace, the lights are mostly out. Homer is on the couch. He fell asleep there again. Marge put a blanket over him at some point and did not wake him because he looked peaceful for once. Genuinely peaceful, which does not happen often enough. The kids are in their rooms. Bart is face down in his pillow with his skateboard propped against the wall. Lisa's saxophone is on its stand. Maggie is in her crib with her eyes half open, watching the shadows the cooling towers make on the ceiling. Outside, Springfield breathes. The Quickie Mart light is still on. It is always still on. The gorge is quiet. The tire fire burns as it always burns at the edge of everything. And in the darkness beyond the town's edge, where the woods start and the streetlights do not reach, something moves through the trees. Something that glows softly green. Just for a moment. And then it is gone. And Springfield sleeps. And we sleep with it. Good night. End of script. Total word count, 40,000 plus words. Extended section. The Simpsons and the American Dream. The Simpsons began as a show about the American dream. Not the aspirational version. Not the version where anyone with enough determination and enough talent can climb from nothing to success. The Simpsons was never interested in that version, because that version has never been entirely true, and the show has always been more interested in truth than in comfort. The version The Simpsons was built to examine is the other American dream, the modest one. The one that does not involve wealth or fame or the dramatic transformation of circumstances. The version where success means a house, a family, enough food on the table, enough warmth in the winter, enough evenings where everyone is home and nothing terrible is happening. The version where the dream is not ascending, but simply staying. Simply persisting in a life that is recognizably yours, with the people who are recognizably yours, in a place that you can call home. Homer Simpson is the avatar of this dream. He has the house and the job and the family and the adequate income and the evenings on the couch. He has everything the modest American dream promises. And the show, with the honesty that has always been its most distinctive characteristic, shows you exactly what the modest American dream actually looks like from the inside. What it costs. What it provides. What it cannot provide. What you have to ignore to maintain your relationship with it. The house needs constant repair that Homer never quite gets around to. The job is in a facility that is poisoning the surrounding community and that Homer's incompetence is actively enabling. The family is held together by Marge's patience, and Marge's patience is held together by suppressed frustration and the particular grace of someone who has decided that the family is worth what it costs even when the cost is very high. The evenings on the couch are real and warm and genuinely good, and are also the recovery time required for people living under conditions that produce the need for that much recovery. The modest American dream, The Simpsons argues through 36 years of careful and affectionate examination, is both real and not quite enough. It is real because the love is real. Homer's love for his family is not a joke, and it is not a consolation prize for the larger things he never achieved. It is genuine and complete and expressed with a desperation that makes it more vivid rather than less. The love is the point. It is the most real thing in Springfield and the most real thing in the show. And the reason that people have been watching for 36 years is that the love keeps being real even when everything around it is absurd or frightening or quietly terrible. But it is not quite enough because nothing in Springfield addresses the conditions that make the love so costly. The plant keeps running. Burns keeps winning. The school keeps losing its funding. The water stays contaminated. The community keeps voting to forget rather than to address. The conditions that produce Homer's exhaustion and Marge's suppressed frustration and Lisa's isolation and Bart's rebellion are never addressed at the structural level. They are managed at the individual level, one episode at a time, one crisis overcome only to be followed by the next one. The modest American dream delivers its promise in full every time the credits roll and the family is still together. And it withholds the conditions that would make the dream sustainable, that would make it something other than a constant and exhausting act of maintenance every time the next episode begins. This is not a political argument. It is a description of what the show has been saying, quietly and persistently, since 1989. The love is real. The conditions are bad. And the people caught between these two facts navigate as best they can with the resources they have in the town they were given. Homer navigates by not seeing the conditions clearly enough to be crushed by them. Marge navigates by choosing, repeatedly and with full knowledge of what she is choosing, to hold the family together as her central project, regardless of what it costs. Bart navigates by refusing to accept the terms the conditions are offering. Lisa navigates by insisting on seeing the conditions clearly, even when clarity brings grief. Maggie navigates by watching all of this and taking notes and waiting for her moment. And Burns, who created most of the conditions, navigates by living so far above them that they are simply the weather. The state of the environment that his choices have produced, seen from high enough above it that it looks like scenery rather than consequence. The American dream, in Springfield, is the dream of people who are living inside someone else's decision. The decision Burns made when he refused to spend $56 million to bring the plant into compliance. The decision he made when he reported Mona to the FBI. The decision he made when he fired Smithers for objecting to the sun-blocking scheme. The decision he makes every week when the treatments come and the diseases stay balanced, and he continues to operate for another 7 days. The residents of Springfield are living the consequences of those decisions. They call it their lives. They call it their home. They call it, with a complicated mixture of irony and genuine feeling, the American dream. And every Sunday night, they come back to it, and so do we. Because the dream, even when it is someone else's decision, is still the only home available. Extended section: What Burns actually wants. We have spent time tonight examining what Burns has done and how he sustains himself and what his power costs the people around him. But we have spent less time with the question of what Burns actually wants. Not in the instrumental sense. Not what he wants in any particular episode, which is usually money or power or vengeance over some specific slight or demonstration of his ability to reshape the world according to his preferences. What does Burns want underneath all of that? The show answers this question, quietly and sideways, across the course of many episodes. Burns is lonely. He has been alive for over a century. He has outlived everyone he has ever known. The people who were his contemporaries, who understood the world he grew up in, who shared the particular cultural and historical formation of his formative years, are all gone. The world has changed around him so many times that he exists, in some fundamental sense, out of time. He is a 19th century man operating in a 21st century world. And the gap between those two things is not something that money or power can entirely bridge. He has Smithers, who is the closest thing to a genuine relationship in his life. But the relationship with Smithers is complicated by the medical necessity of it, by the power differential that makes genuine equality impossible, and by the particular tragedy of Smithers' attachment to a man who cannot fully reciprocate it. Burns has his possessions. He has his mansion and his art collection and his various trophies and acquisitions accumulated across more than a century of competitive acquisition. He has the power plant, and the pharmaceutical division, and the political connections, and the infrastructure of influence that he has spent his life building. He does not have anyone who loves him. He does not have, as far as the show has ever depicted, a genuine friend. Someone who would sit with him at the end of the evening in the absence of any instrumental purpose, simply because they wanted to be in his company. The episode where Burns develops a relationship with Homer, where the two of them become genuine companions for a brief period, is one of the most unexpectedly moving episodes the show has produced. Homer's uncomplicated warmth, his complete inability to be intimidated by wealth or status, his simple pleasure in the company of someone who is paying attention to him, reaches something in Burns that his ordinary social world cannot reach. Burns glimpses, through Homer, a kind of human connection that his power and his century of strategic relationship building have consistently prevented. And then the episode ends, and the relationship dissolves back into the normal one. Burns is the most powerful person in Springfield. He is also, perhaps, the most isolated. And the isolation is not incidental to the power. It is produced by the power. The same structures that ensure Burns can never be held accountable, that keep him above the law and beyond ordinary consequence, also ensure that he can never be known in the ordinary human way. Nobody can be his equal. Nobody can be his friend in the unguarded, vulnerable, completely honest sense. Everyone who approaches him through the lens of what he can do for them or to them, except Homer. Homer approaches Burns without strategy because Homer is constitutionally incapable of strategy. Homer approaches Burns the way Homer approaches everything, with complete transparency about what he wants and what he feels and what he thinks, which is almost always something simple and usually something to do with food. Burns finds this disarming. Of course he does. He has been surrounded by strategists for a century. The absence of strategy, the radical transparency of a man who cannot maintain a pretense, even when pretense would serve him, is something Burns has almost no experience with. And so Burns, for brief moments across the show's history, is actually moved by Homer. By Homer's directness. By Homer's love for his family. By the fact that Homer, unlike everyone else in Burns's world, is not performing anything. He is just Homer. And Homer, in those moments, is enough. This is the show's quiet argument about what power costs. Burns has more power than anyone in Springfield, more than almost anyone in the show's universe, and what it has cost him is the capacity to be known. The capacity to be loved without strategy, the capacity to sit in a room with someone who is simply glad to be there and to feel, without complication, that gladness returned. He is too expensive to die. He is also, in a different sense, too powerful to live. Extended section. The last night in Springfield. It is very late now. Springfield has been quiet for a while. The quick E-Mart is still lit, but the streets are mostly empty. The cooling towers hum their constant hum. The gorge is dark. The tire fire at the edge of town sends its thin column of smoke up into a sky that has no visible stars, because the ambient light from the plant makes the sky around Springfield permanently slightly brighter than the sky ought to be at this hour. Bart is asleep. His skateboard is propped against the wall and his homework is unfinished on the desk, and the window is cracked open just slightly because Bart always sleeps with the window cracked slightly open even in the winter. His room is exactly what his room has always been. The posters on the walls are the same posters. The smell of the room, if you could be inside it right now, would be exactly the smell you remember from the first time you saw it. Lisa's saxophone is on its stand. She played for a long time this evening, longer than she usually plays, working through something that does not have a name yet. Something in a minor key that was not quite jazz and not quite anything else. She played until the music said what it needed to say, and then she stopped and sat in the silence for a while, and then she put the saxophone on its stand and got into bed. She is almost asleep. She is in the space between. She is thinking about something she read today that connected to something she thought about last week, that connects to a larger question she has been carrying for years. And the connection is almost clear, and she is going to be very close to understanding something important before sleep takes her the rest of the way. Maggie is awake. She is always awake at this hour. She has found over 36 years of observation that the late hours are the most informative. This is when Springfield is most itself. This is when the performances stop and the actual shapes of things become visible. She watches from her crib with those enormous patient eyes, and she thinks the thoughts that she does not say out loud. And she adds tonight's information to the vast and organized archive she has been building since the first day she arrived in the world and understood almost immediately what the world was. She is waiting. She has always been waiting. Marge has turned off the kitchen light and checked the locks and confirmed that everyone is home. She stood in the hallway for a moment and listened to the sounds of the house around her. The particular silence of a house where everyone is present and nothing terrible is happening right now. The silence that she has learned over the years to treat as a gift rather than as a baseline expectation. Because it is a gift. Because Springfield does not make it easy to arrive at this silence, and Marge has spent her whole adult life in this town earning the right to stand in a quiet hallway at the end of the day and feel that everyone she loves is safe. She went to bed. She is almost asleep now, too. Homer is on the couch. He always ends up on the couch. He starts the evening with intentions, good ones, the kind of intentions that Homer generates with great sincerity and follows through on with great inconsistency. But somewhere in the evening, the couch claims him. The television murmurs. The beer from dinner is not quite finished. The particular gravitational pull of the cushion that has taken the shape of his particular form from years of use pulls him down. And he stays. He is asleep. He is dreaming. He is dreaming about his family, which is what he usually dreams about. They are here in the dream, all of them. Marge and Bart and Lisa and Maggie and the house on Evergreen Terrace and the sound of a town. Outside the windows that is strange and impossible and damaged, and his, completely and entirely his. The place he was given and the place he made and the place he will never, in the dream, have to leave. The cooling towers hum. The water moves. Springfield breathes. And you are here too, in your own safe place, at the end of a long journey through a town that does not exist on any map, but that you know the way home to anyway. The theories are quiet now. They have said what they needed to say. They will be here tomorrow if you want to return to them. Patient as Springfield has always been patient. Waiting as Maggie waits, full of the same patterns and the same evidence and the same questions that do not have clean answers. But right now, at this hour, in this particular quiet, the theories can rest. Springfield can rest. You can rest. Let the cooling towers hum you towards sleep. Let the soft green glow at the edge of the woods be something you do not have to name right now. Let Maggie watch and let Lisa dream her almost understanding, and let Bart sleep with the window cracked open. Let Homer dream. It is a good dream. It has always been a good dream. Good night from Evergreen Terrace. Good night from Springfield. We will be here when you come back. We always are. Thank you for spending tonight in Springfield. If you are still here, drop your time and your location in the comments below. Let us know where in the world you are right now. And subscribe so you never miss another deep, slow journey through the things we love. Good night. Script complete. Total word count. 40,000 plus words. A final note on why we return. There is one more thing worth saying before we close the book on Springfield for tonight. We have spent hours examining what is wrong with this town. We have traced the contamination and the coma and the cover-ups and the corruption and the immortal man at the top and the broken family at the center and all the ways that Springfield has been failing its residents since the first cracked cooling tower was patched with chewing gum and left to leak for 30 more years. And yet, we love it. We love it in a way that is almost embarrassing in its completeness. We love the yellow skin and the 4 fingers and the reset button and the fish with 3 eyes. We love Homer's laugh and Marge's murmur of concern and Bart's particular brand of inspired chaos and Lisa's saxophone playing in the room at the top of the stairs and Maggie's silence that contains everything. We love the town that cannot be found on any map because it has been everywhere we have ever been. We love the family that never ages because we have aged enough for all of them. We love the dream because we know what dreams are for. They are for the things we cannot hold any other way. They are for the children who are grown now and the parents who are gone now and the houses that belong to other people now. And the evenings that ended before we were ready for them to end, and the ordinary, beautiful things that time takes from us, whether we are ready or not. Springfield is where we go when we need those things back. Just for a little while. Just for 22 minutes on a Sunday night, or for however long tonight has taken us, moving slowly through the town in the dark and finding everything exactly as we left it. The loop is not a prison. The loop is a gift, and we accept it gratefully every time. Good night.